Deputy Chancellor Quintana, can we just test your audio once again?
Sure. Thank you, President Lugo. Can you hear me clearly?
Yep, we can hear you. Thank you.
Fantastic. Great. Thank you.
At this time, would all sergeants please start your recordings? PC recording started.
Cloud recording is rolling.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's remote New York City Council hearing of the Committee on Education. At this time, would all panelists please turn on your video? To minimize disruption, please place electronic devices to vibrate or silent. If you wish to submit testimony, you can send it to testimony@council.nyc.gov. Again, that's testimony@council.nyc.gov. Thank you for your cooperation. Chair, we are ready to begin.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Good afternoon, everyone. And we will start. Hear me loud and clear, correct?
Yes.
We can.
Okay. Good afternoon and welcome to today's education hearing on COVID's impact on English language learners. For this hearing, we'll use the abbreviation ELLS when referring to English language learners. I am Rita Joseph, Chair of the Education Committee. Since May 2020, the Education Committee has examined how COVID-19 pandemic has affected our city's education system. In particular, the committee has explored the pandemic's impact on students' health and safety, social emotional learning, and well-being, academic achievement, as well as interruption of students' access to art instructions and extracurricular activities. It is imperative that this committee pays particular attention to the effects on vulnerable student populations, such as students with disabilities and students in shelters. One student population that is near and dear to my heart is English language learners, ELLS. The committee has not previously examined the pandemic's impact on ELLS, and as a former educator who also served as English as a new language teacher and coordinator, I know firsthand the challenges and struggles facing non-English speaking immigrant students and families. English language learners have faced significantly more challenges in schools even before the pandemic. I saw how immigrant families struggled to navigate language barriers and other challenges that impeded their students' academic achievement. And I grapple with how educators could assist in closing the achievement gap between ELLS and their US-born classmates. For example, on the pre-COVID state exam, only 9.3 students of ELLS in grades 3 through 8 scored at or above proficient, compared to 47.4 of all students in those grades citywide. Graduation rates for ELLS in city schools also have historically been much lower than those of other students. According to DOE in 2020, 45.7% of ELLS graduated within 4 years of entry into high school, compared to 78.8% for all students citywide. The challenges that ELLS and immigrant New Yorkers face in public schools have only worsened. Immigrant neighborhoods saw much higher rates of COVID-19 than white affluent neighborhoods. And immigrant communities are higher risk of poor health as well as COVID-19 exposure due to high rates of crowded living arrangements, poverty, and inadequate access to healthcare and insurance. The onset of COVID and the abrupt move to full remote learning in March 2020 heightened the existing challenges for ELLS students. Some of the most significant obstacles faced ELLS during full-time remote learning included a lack of digital devices and broadband, coupled with their parents' limited capacity to support home learning due to language barriers. For many ELs, being in school every day and engaging with their school community is typically their only exposure to listening, speaking, reading, and writing English. And remote learning restricted that critical exposure for ELs. There's also been a shortage of bilingual teachers and staff to provide technical support regarding instructions and assignments in families' native language. In addition, compared to overall attendance during 2019 to 2020 school year, ELs have shown a much greater decline in attendance. This dramatic change in attendance is especially concerning, given that ELs have the highest dropout rate of any student group. Last May, then Mayor Bill de Blasio announced a new initiative, the New York City Universal Academic Recovery Plan, which designated approximately $500 million for academic recovery effort, including support for ELs. I can't think of a better way to use federal dollars. However, since the announcement, there has been no updates or details available on the DOE's website as to how they spent the funding. At today's hearing, the committee hopes to learn what DOE has been doing since the start of the pandemic in March 2020 in order to identify and address how can we reverse EL's student learning loss. In particular, I would like to hear about the academic recovery instituted since July 2020, what progress, if any, ELs have made as a result. And now that we have a new mayor and chancellor, we'd also welcome any information about the current administration's future plan or proposal to help at-risk EL students. I want to thank everyone who testified today. I want to thank the City Council staff for all the work they put in today's hearing. Malcolm Butehorn, Jan Atwell, Chelsea Butemore, Macis Sarkisian. If I missed it, I'm sorry, and Frank Perez. I also want to thank my staff, Sam Weinberger and Connor Irving. I will now turn today's moderator to Malcolm Butehorn, counsel to the committee.
Thank you, Chair, and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Malcolm Butehorn, counsel to the Education Committee. I would first like to make sure that we acknowledge council members present for the record. Council members Lewis, Ung, Narcisse, Menon, Stevens, Sanchez, Feliz, De La Rosa, Krishnan, and Abreu. Before we begin testimony, I want to remind everyone that you will be on mute until you are called on to testify. I will be calling on public witnesses to testify in panels of 4 after the conclusion of the administration's testimony and council member questions. Council members who have questions should use the raised hand function in Zoom. I will call on you in the order with which you raise your hand after the full panel has completed testimony. We will be limiting council member questions to 5 minutes, and for the purposes of this virtual hearing, we will not be allowing a second round of questioning. For public witnesses, once your name is called, a member of our staff will unmute you, and the Sergeant at Arms will give you the go-ahead to begin after setting the timer, so please listen for that cue. For fairness for all present, all public testimony will be limited to 3 minutes per person. When the Sergeant announces that your 3 minutes is up, we ask that you please wrap up your comments so we can move on to the next person. I will now call on the following members of the administration to testify. Carolyn Quintana, Deputy Chancellor of Teaching and Learning Opportunities. Mirza Sanchez Medina, Deputy Chief Academic Officer, Division of Multilingual Learners. Kleber Palmer, Executive Director, Office of Translation and Interpretation, and Scott Strickland, Deputy CIO. I will first read the oath, and after I will call on each member from the administration to individually respond. Do you affirm to tell the whole truth and nothing but the truth before this committee and to respond honestly to council member questions? Deputy Chancellor?
I do.
Ms. Sanchez Medina?
I do.
Thank you. Kleber Palmer?
I do.
And Scott Strickland?
I do.
Thank you. Deputy Chancellor, you may begin when you are ready.
Thank you. Um, Good afternoon, Chair Joseph and all the members of the Education Committee here today. I am Carolyn Quintana, Deputy Chancellor of Teaching and Learning Opportunities for New York City Public Schools. I'm joined today by Mirza Sanchez Medina, my Deputy Chief Academic Officer for Multilingual Learners. Also joining me today are Kleber Palma, Executive Director of the Translation and Interpretation Unit, Scott Strickland, Director of Technology and additional staff. Thank you for the opportunity to discuss the New York City Public Schools efforts to address the impact of COVID on English language learners. I know that this is a topic of significant importance to the chair. We've had several conversations about English language learners, and as a former longtime educator in our public schools, I know she cares very much about this particular group of students. And we welcome the City Council to be part of this conversation with us as well. Since this is my first time appearing in front of the committee, I wanted to just share a little bit about my background. I began my career as a first grade dual language teacher at a private school in Argentina. My public school career started about 20 years later in the Bronx, first as a ninth grade ELA teacher and then as a literacy coach. I was the district coordinator of literacy for grades K through 12 in the city of White Plains before I became the principal of Bronxdale High School in the Bronx. And that one is still my favorite job. I had an opportunity to support the development of new principals citywide as a principal coach. I got to see a range of schools across New York City before leading the Affinity Schools citywide office. I'm excited to take on the role of Deputy Chancellor of Teaching and Learning Opportunities under the leadership of Chancellor David Banks. We have put together a fantastic team, but more importantly, I believe wholeheartedly in his vision that each and every one of our students can and will graduate on the pathway to a rewarding career and long-term economic security, equipped to be a positive force for change in our communities and our city. You've heard that Chancellor Banks.
Deputy Chancellor, I'm sorry, could you just speak just a little louder? It's just coming in a little muffled, sorry.
I think it's the mask. Is that better?
It's a little better, yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yep, no problem. Sorry about that. We've heard Chancellor Banks state that every young person is filled with brilliance, promise, and gifts. He believes that all children deserve a strong academic foundation that prepares them to graduate with an employable skill set. Equally important, our students deserve the tools and the support needed in order to be physically and emotionally healthy. We will work on behalf of all of our children, including multilingual and immigrant children from every neighborhood, and especially those who've been historically left behind. We aim to transform the New York City public school experience by giving every student the support, learning opportunities, and resources to graduate from high school, attend college, or learn a trade, get a great job, and become informed and engaged citizens. To advance these goals, Chancellor Banks has outlined 4 pillars to improve our school system. And if you are available on Wednesday, he will be sharing this information and his plan for this administration on Wednesday afternoon. His 4 pillars include reimagining the student experience so that they are excited about learning through group work, solving problems, and wrestling with issues that connect to their communities. We'll do that by scaling, sustaining, and restoring what works, identifying amazing practices around our system and sharing them so that they can be models or examples for other schools to emulate and from which to learn. We will prioritize wellness and its link to student success, including safe schools, access to green spaces, high quality nutrition, and comprehensive whole child support, so that we can reach a broad range of each student's needs. And finally, and this one really applies to the group of people that we have here, empowering the community and families to be our true partners. As I think about the role we all play guiding our young people to success, and as we begin this hearing grounded in the impact of COVID on our English language learners, I'm reminded of the heroic efforts and the resiliency that all of you, including our staff, families, students, have demonstrated thus far during the global pandemic. Thank you. We're fortunate to live in a city built by immigrants and to have a school system that reflects the rich diversity of our communities. Over 140,000, that's about 16% of our almost 1 million students, receive services as identified English language learners. And an additional 229,000 students speak a language other than English at home. Our students and their families come from over 200 countries, and we speak over 175 different home languages. This administration is committed to providing our multilingual and immigrant students with equitable access to rigorous instruction and high expectations in a safe and welcoming environment. The science of learning and development tells us that we must provide an education that affirms students' racial, cultural, and linguistic identities. I firmly believe that all people have the capacity for growth. It's our responsibility then to build and strengthen a multi-tiered system of learning and development that equips adults with the competence and confidence to create the conditions for all learners to thrive so that students can leave school as positive forces for change on a pathway to independence. We fully recognize that as a system, we need to do better to improve outcomes for English language learners. The COVID-19 pandemic, as you heard the chair say already, disproportionately impacted our multilingual and immigrant students and families, many of whom serve as essential workers or live in the neighborhoods that were hardest hit by the pandemic. Remote learning was especially disruptive for our L students who benefit most from an in-person learning environment. Our full return to in-person learning this year provides all students with the sanctuary and support that they need each day. As the city continues to turn the corner on COVID, we must support every student in their recovery. We can't return to the way things were before. And I'm thankful to this council for your advocacy that has helped to make much of this already possible. With federal stimulus funding and the support of this council, we've made a historic $350 million investment to support schools with meeting the social, emotional, and academic needs of students. This includes an allocation targeted at multilingual learners with weights for newcomer and long-term Ls, and for students with interrupted or inconsistent formal education. Using formative assessment data, every school was required to determine multilingual learners that may need additional support and interventions, and subsequently design a support plan for those students. In addition, New York City Public Schools made a historic investment to bring to 100% fair student funding for all schools. The FSF formula also includes weights for Ls that schools can use to provide L services. As I mentioned prior with the pillars, we know that families are our closest partners in helping students thrive. And we recognize that communicating with our immigrant families was especially challenging during the pandemic. As part of the chancellor's commitment to empowering families, we are welcoming all families and will be seeking input on the policies that affect their children. We want to bring in our parents who are not typically engaged with the school system and elevate their crucial voices. I'd like to thank the council for being partners in this critical effort and for its unprecedented $4 million investment in language access to New York City Public Schools. You've helped us improve outreach, engagement, and communication with multilingual and immigrant families. With this funding, we are working with immigrant-led community-based organizations and other stakeholders to pursue several initiatives, including a Know Your Rights citywide campaign for families of students with disabilities, enhancing the Parent University platform, interpretation training for bilingual school staff, and strengthening language access supports in hard-to-reach communities. Our shared mission is more vital than ever given all our school communities have been through. We know that there is much more to do to ensure that every student and family receives the support they need in order to be successful. I look forward to our continued partnership, and I thank you for all you do for New York City Public Schools. I'm now going to turn it over to Mirza, who will share a more detailed account of our efforts to support our multilingual and immigrant students and their families during these unprecedented times. Thank you for the time.
Thank you, Deputy Chancellor Quintana. I also want to begin by thanking Chair Joseph and all the members of the committee, Education Committee, for providing us this opportunity to discuss our efforts on behalf of multilingual and immigrant students and families. Before I begin, I would like to provide you with an overview of my background, a quick one. I have been an educator for 36 years. I was first recruited from Puerto Rico to be a bilingual chemistry teacher at Martin Luther King High School. In 2003, I founded Manhattan Bridges High School and designed the school to specifically serve English language learners. I led the school as a principal for over 15 years. I joined the Division of Multilingual Learners in 2019 with the goal of improving outcomes for our multilingual learners and immigrant students citywide. While we have seen increased graduation rates, as the chair alluded to, spoke to, for ELLs over the past several years, from 34.7% prior to my arrival to the most recent announced 60.3%, we still have considerable work to do to ensure that every student can access and attain high quality instruction in a supportive and inclusive environment. The Division of Multilingual Learners serves the unique needs of students who speak a language other than English at home. To accomplish this, we focus on 3 parts. First, programs and services, capacity building, and family and community partnerships. This includes a multi-year strategy to strengthen, sustain, and scale bilingual education programs, developing research-based resources and targeted professional learning opportunities, supporting the college and career readiness of multilingual learners and immigrant students, and supporting families to exercise their right to make informed decisions about their children's education through targeted resources and training for our families and school-based staff. Throughout the pandemic, we have provided targeted support to ensure continuity of services for our multilingual learners, including priority for devices, technical support in families' home languages, and instructional units designed specifically to support their learning. For school year 2021, schools developed an updated ELL service plan to address the needs of their multilingual learners during the remote and blended learning. These updates included the use of digital curriculum and texts in students' home language, online videos to build background knowledge and vocabulary, and virtual parent engagement in families' preferred languages. As we fully resumed in-person learning in fall 2021, we took a multifaceted approach to supporting our multilingual learners that started during the summer using the multi-tier systems of support framework. We also allocated approximately $8 million to schools in all 5 boroughs to conduct outreach to multilingual learners in the summer and early fall. This included wellness checks with students and families to identify any social and emotional support needed and to collect valuable information on our multilingual learners' language development during the pandemic. To support the academic recovery efforts Deputy Chancellor Quintana shared, our office offered guidance and professional learning on screening and the use of data to support student progress. For our schools with bilingual Spanish programs, we ensured that screeners were available in both English and Spanish. Schools with an existing bilingual education program also received funding to purchase or develop classroom libraries in their home language. As we planned for a full return in-person learning, we further considered the type of programs and resources schools serving a high number of multilingual and immigrant students and families will need to make them feel engaged and welcome. We provided these schools with funding to support Dream Squads, a school-based team designed to cultivate a safe and inclusive environment for multilingual learners, immigrant youth, and undocumented students. We also created programs to help schools strengthen family engagement and cross digital divide. Finally, strengthening graduation rates and post-secondary readiness for multilingual learners and immigrant students remains a priority, a very big priority for me as well. With stimulus funding, we designed the Immigrant Ambassador Program, an initiative that matches our immigrant students with CUNY students to foster mentorship and early college awareness. We also expanded the post-secondary readiness for ELL's program, PREP, to provide multilingual learners and immigrant students with culturally responsive advising toward a post-secondary pathway of their choosing. To support our overage and undercredited ELLs, we are focused on re-engagement and dropout prevention, particularly for those who took on work or additional responsibilities to support their families during the pandemic. Our division is working closely with school community and advocates to strengthen and scale what works best for our older ELLs, including expanding access to ELL-focused transfer schools in areas of need. We have heard valuable feedback on the need for us to better support these students from advocates, our city council partners, and other stakeholders, and we look forward to continued community dialogue on this important work. We recognize that communicating with families during remote learning was a significant challenge for schools. To ensure our multilingual and immigrant families remained informed during remote learning, we continue to provide translation and interpretation support for schools to communicate with families in their preferred language, including over-the-phone interpretation services 24/7 in over 350 languages. We engage with multimedia outlets to share key updates around device survey, remote learning survey, and parent university. We also conducted live workshops for families in languages other than English alongside our community partners and city agencies such as the Mayor's Office of Immigrant Affairs. We recognize that we are only at the beginning of the recovery process, not the end. Supporting the needs of ELLs will be one of our most important ongoing priorities, and we will adjust and refine our approach to ensure all students receive the targeted services they need to excel. We remain committed to addressing the needs of our multilingual learners and the detrimental effects of the pandemics on our students' development, however long that may take, while giving them a strong academic foundation so they can thrive in school and in life. We welcome the partnership of this Committee of Education in pursuit of these goals. I am happy to address any questions you may have. Thank you very much.
Chair will now turn to you for your questions. I just want to remind council members that if they have questions following the chair, to please use the raise hand function on Zoom. I will call on you in the order with which you raised your hand, and you will receive 5 minutes for questions. Turn to the chair.
Thank you, Malcolm. Thank you, Ms. Medina, and thank you for all those who spoke. We know that during the pandemic, that attendance was really low. What is the current ENL population from K to 8 and from 9 to 12? Do you have any numbers?
Thank you for that question, Chair. I don't have the numbers broken up by grade level, but I can absolutely get that for you. As of last week, so year to date through February 15th, the attendance rate for ELS was 86.8%, and citywide that rate is 87.5%. So we're encroaching on pre-pandemic attendance rates, and we're very, very excited about what we're able to offer and how we're re-engaging students to come back to the classroom.
How is the outreach looking for that, to bring back the students that fell through the crack, we lost? What does the outreach look like?
Yep, so good question, thank you. I think it's a multi-pronged approach, and part of that is ensuring that we have strong instruction in the classroom. Part of that is also we have been engaging with parents and community around the different initiatives that we have in schools, and schools have been reaching out to their families, and so CCOs and family coordinators from the superintendent's offices are working very closely with the schools to ensure that students are returning and parents know what to offer. The schools are safe spaces, and the chancellor continues to communicate that schools are the best place for our students to be. It is where we can offer them the social environment that they need, that we know is important for their development, is where they can receive the academic supports that they need, but then also just a safe and welcoming space in terms of health and well-being too. So we continue to communicate that, and you hear the chancellor talk about that always, that school is where we want to see our children now.
Is that message being sent out in language spoken to the families? Because that was one of the biggest struggles we had during COVID-19. It was getting the messaging out. The languages were not being sent out to the native speakers in their native languages.
Yep, thank you for that question. And I know that it is something that we absolutely have been working on. And Cleaver, I don't know if that's something that you want to speak to more carefully about, the way that we are engaging with our families in different languages.
Absolutely, thank you, Deputy Chancellor. During the pandemic, there was a constant messaging of updates, changing of policies, and a lot of those communications were immediately made available in translation online for dissemination and distribution at schools. That content was also available online as HTML content. However, I think that where we have room for growth is at the school level, and to ensure that any communications that initiated at the school also get into translation. There was a heavy reliance during the pandemic on machine translation tools, and that's something we are looking into very seriously to gauge and assess the quality of those tools to give guidance to schools to supplement the central T&I unit, which provides translation support by human translations.
As an educator who left the classroom last week, I can say one of the biggest challenges we faced is my ENLs had no access to digital devices. So the communication with parents at home is to go on the website. If they have no access, how can we look at it in a different way? Because that was the biggest barriers for our MyELs: no access to devices, no access to broadband.
Thank you for that question, Chair, and really fortunate to have Scott Strickland on with us as well. It has been a commitment of this cabinet and prior to make sure that we have a device in the hands of every child who needs one. And in a little while, Ms., I can talk a little bit more too about the steps we took to ensure that our families also knew how to use the devices once they had them, including workshops on Google Classroom and other Google functions. But Scott, if you can talk a little bit about the device distribution, I think that's helpful too.
Sure. Appreciate that and appreciate the question. When we first went 100% remote from March and did not come back even in part till September, we needed to send devices directly to students' homes. And the only way we had to communicate with that was the online form for people to fill out. They could call the help desk at the department and also get a device sent home. We realized that was maybe an impediment to some. Since September of 2020, devices have been shipped to schools based on student needs. So as students were coming back, the devices and the needs for those devices were identified by the schools, and the schools have been distributing devices to students since that time. We are now up to 650,000 either iPads or Chromebooks distributed to our students. These were purchased centrally, all with data plans, and then those devices were loaned to students while they were with the DOE, similar to loaning a textbook. They were supposed to turn the devices in when they leave the DOE. So we've covered a lot of our students. That would include certainly a high percentage of our ELS students. And even today, we have additional iPads and Chromebooks available for any student that needs them. The past administration made a statement, I guess I would say, a goal to have a one-to-one correspondence between devices and students. So any student that does not have one that's currently enrolled is entitled to one. And we do have inventory to get them one if they do not have one.
Wonderful.
Yes. And I will add that, so while students were waiting for devices, we make sure that we sent printed materials home. And this was extremely important to us to ensure that every student was connected to learning instruction, quality instruction. And one of the strategies that we used, our division, was to provide workshops and on even how to navigate Google Classroom, how to navigate, how to use the translation feature, and to ensure that students were getting the information and their families and their parents felt comfortable in navigating the system. Yes.
Something that I wanted to add. Thank you, Mitza. And I love that point about families feeling comfortable. And that's part of the idea behind families no longer having to fill out a centralized form for a device. Schools can ask Central directly for the internet-enabled devices, and that removes an unnecessary barrier for families, which was a barrier that families previously had faced. And so again, increases that level of comfort that we're talking about.
Because in the beginning of COVID, I recall that we were the ones filling out forms for families. I was in the center of that because they had no access and they didn't know how to fill out the forms. And once the devices arrived, they also didn't know how to set them up. So we were setting up, and I've said this so many times, we were using WhatsApp to communicate with families to make sure they knew how to set it up, using video calls. And the packets, again, these are English language learners. If I have a barrier, a language is a barrier for me, a packet won't serve any good for me because I can't do the work and there's no one to provide the support at home. So those packages to me were parents were calling us, and those packets served no good for our students. And so a lot of them were pulled away from learning, and then that's discouraged them. So hopefully we'll get it better this time around to make sure that none of our students are ever left behind again. My other question for you is, can I get a breakdown of your dual languages, your transitional bilingual programs, and your standalone ENL classrooms? Do you have those numbers for me?
Yes. Liz, do you want to answer that question? Or I can do that if you'd like. So in 2021, 25% of our ELs were entering proficiency level. Which is important to know as well. But in terms of bilingual programs, 2021 school year, we had 538 bilingual programs. 24 of them were newly opened. We had 266 dual language programs. 223 of those were general education. and 43 of those were special education, and 272 transitional bilingual. 171 of those general education, and 101 of those special education. I don't know if there's additional information that you want as far as that. 97% of our Ls receive bilingual ed or ENL services, and about 17% of them receive both.
Then Mayor created an initiative, the New York City Universal Academic Plan. Can you tell me what the status of those recovery efforts are? Because we've never heard anything after that.
What's that question?
Can you repeat that question? I'm sorry, Sarah.
Concerning the academic recovery plan, there was a $500 million then allocated by Mayor de Blasio about that effort, and the targeted students were ENL students, and we've never heard any updates or any numbers or data as to what's happening with that.
Yes, great. Okay, thank you for that question. Just needed to make sure I understood the question correctly. So we're prioritizing that funding for students who need it most, and we'll be focusing on communities that have been hardest hit by the pandemic, and those funds were absolutely applied to all of our students. And as we know, that initiatives that are good for all are necessarily good for our Ls. In addition, of the $350 million that New York City Public Schools invested, of the money that was invested, $350 million of it was set aside for socio-emotional and academic support. And so there has been a series of trainings and resources made available specifically to meet the socio-emotional and academic needs of all of our students. The funding also included a targeted allocation, as you just mentioned, for multilingual learners, with weights, as we mentioned earlier, for newcomers, long-term Ls, and SIFE. And the way that worked was every school has been required to determine the groups of students who need additional support and the interventions that best fit their needs. And then those schools actually created plans. And so they used the funds to both design and implement a support plan for Ls with identified needs. Additionally, the Division of Multilingual Learners invested $11.9 million to support schools with large populations of multi-language learners and immigrant students. And those are broken up. About $7.6 million went to 682 schools for NYSATEL, special administration, and wellness checks. 1.25 million went to 450 schools for culturally responsive home language libraries, which you heard Misa speak about during her opening statement. About 2.2 million went to 108 schools for family leadership and digital literacy for multilanguage learners and Ls. And about 500,000 went to those 22 schools for the Dream Squads that Misa had also mentioned, and about 200,000 to 20 schools for post-secondary readiness for Ls program, which we call PREP. And finally, 200,000 to 21 schools for the Immigrant Ambassador program. We do have some new new investments that we are exploring that we're hoping to look into further for the upcoming budget cycle, but no commitments yet. We're really thinking about opportunities, and as you heard Misa talk about, the expansion of transfer schools, the strengthening and expansion of bilingual programs, and we've been having conversations about a heritage language curriculum development.
Wonderful. In your testimony earlier, Ms. Medina, you suggested older Ls. That's another population that suffers a lot. We noticed that, I know for sure that your transfer schools, you have 5 of them that are all located in Manhattan. We're looking to find out if there will be, I would love to see, as an educator myself, to expand it to the 5 boroughs so other students can attend. They don't have to travel so far. And your plans to help bring back those older Ls would be also helpful, please.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you for addressing a population that it's extremely important. One of the strategies of what we did is that we mapped out where our older Ls who were also undercredited lived, where the students who had dropped out, where they lived. And then we also looked at the proximity of L-focused transfer schools citywide. And yes, we knew about the concentration of L-focused transfer schools in Manhattan and one in the Bronx. And together with the advocates and District 79, we've been working to develop a plan to see how we can expand the L-focused transfer schools for older Ls, especially in Queens, in Brooklyn, and hopefully also in the Bronx. We've partnered with these folks who are extremely passionate, the advocates about this work, and have really taught us a lot in terms of what the needs of the families. I, as a principal of an L-focused school, worked with this population and also worked with transfer schools. And we partnered, and especially in developing a very clear plan to ensure that these students not only received the credits that they needed, but also had a clear path for college or career. So we want to make sure that we are following up with the older Ls, especially in providing them the support either in transfer schools or the support that we can provide in the school that they're in. So re-engaging these students is extremely important. And this is why we go back to what's the core, right? If we use the multi-tier system of support, how we can strengthen the core instruction, that's tier 1, to ensure the students are engaged, that they are receiving instruction, that it's standard-based, that it's that the content, it's grade level, that we are addressing the linguistic and literacy of our multilingual learners, and then at the same time, providing them the interventions in tier 2 and tier 3 that they need, and the resources that schools need to do that. So a very strong instruction with a clear plan for the pathway moving forward works not just for an ELL, but works for our older Ls as well.
Chair, I'm just going to interrupt one moment. Deputy Chancellor, I'm sorry, I got a message from a few council members. If it's possible to answer questions without the mask, because they're having trouble hearing some of the data that you were providing in response to Chair Joseph. Sorry, Chair, turn it back to you.
Not a problem. And if for some reason that still doesn't work, I can log in for sound via my phone. So please let me know.
Thank you.
Malcolm, would you like her to repeat the data on the standalone dual language and bilingual program for those council members who did not hear it?
Yes, Deputy Chancellor, if you could, that would be great. Thank you.
Sure, not a problem. I'm not sure where we started. So we have 147,287 students who are L, so about 16% of the population. And I know earlier we had asked about breakdown of attendance by grade band. I don't have that, but I do have enrollment by grade band if you wanted that information as well. But what we had said was that of the programs available, 97% in 2020-21 received bilingual education or ENL services, and 17% of our Ls received both bilingual and ENL services. We talked about 538 bilingual programs, 24 newly opened, 272 transitional bilingual ed. 171 of those are general education, and 101 of those are special education. Can you hear me clearly now, or is this still not clear enough?
Can you guys hear her, council members? Can y'all put your thumbs up if you can hear
I'm seeing nodding heads.
Okay,
Yeah.
fantastic. Thank you. Appreciate it. Let's see. Okay. 266 dual language programs. 223 of those are general education, and 43 special education. And I'm not sure if there was anything else that I had shared in that response, but I'm happy to answer any questions that come up because of that.
To support your multi-language learners, your Title III funding, how much fundings are your schools getting for your immigrant populations in Title III?
So $17.8 million goes to 1,012 schools for Title III limited English proficient. It's a total of $30 million went to public and non-public schools. And that was through a school allocation memo regarding supplemental instruction, relevant PD, and family engagement. Within that 30 million, 17.8 went to 1,012 schools for Title III limited English proficiency, 1.7 million to 184 schools using Title III immigrant funds.
Wonderful. One of the things I noticed that being in the classroom and working with the ENL population a lot, we noticed that during the pandemic, there was a high call of ACS on English language learners' families. How is that being addressed, and where are we now on that?
My understanding is that the ACS calls were related to the initial need for devices and for absences that were generated as a result of the pandemic. And we have messaged quite frequently that devices should not be a reason to contact ACS. But also, as you heard Scott share, we are making sure that we have devices in the hands of every child who needs one, and have been working with borough field offices as well as superintendencies to ensure that students have what they need.
And last year, we know that, can you give us some data on your ENLs taking the math exam and the ELA exams? How are the numbers looking now in terms of data? How proficient? Where are we in that realm?
Sure. Thank you for that question, Chair. I'm going to bump that one over to Mirza. I do know that state tests were offered on a limited, or were limited rather, this past year, but I will bump that over to get the accurate data.
We're looking for that data for you, and we'll bring it back.
Okay, Chair. So we'll go ahead and turn to your colleagues, and then we will come back to you. But for the record, we were joined by a host of council members Gutierrez, Palladino, Dinowitz, Gennaro, Brewer, Hanks, Lee, Ressler, and Aviles. The first council member we return to for questions is Councilmember Menon, followed by Dinowitz and Narcisse, and there's more after that. And I just want to remind council members that we are doing 5 minutes for council member questions. So we will first turn to Councilmember Menon.
Time
Great.
starts now.
Thank you so much. I want to thank Chair Joseph for this hearing. As a daughter of an L, this hearing has personal resonance to me, so I thank you for holding it. While the committee report notes dropout rates both pre-COVID and after COVID, there's no indication that adequate follow-ups occurred to determine the whereabouts and the current status of students labeled as L dropouts. Does this mean that the DOE does not know what happened to these students? And can you please clarify this? Because obviously specific outcome information is sorely needed here.
Thank you for that question, Councilmember Menon. I can look into that further. I don't have a response to that question at this time, but we are absolutely invested in ensuring that we know where all of our students are, and we are absolutely invested in making sure that our students are prepared to graduate. It is an issue that I am now aware of and want to make sure that I can follow up with you. So we'll look into that in just a moment. And if not, then I will follow up with you directly.
Okay, great, thank you. And then can you also answer what particular boroughs have more L dropouts? And can you also talk about how the DOE is going to determine how to distribute funding amongst the boroughs, really to ensure that there is equity?
Yes, thank you. So as far as the distribution of funds, those decisions are being made. There's prioritization, as far as the designation of a student. So students with interrupted formal education, Ls, are weighted more, and so schools that have very specific student populations will receive those funds. We are also focusing on the communities that were hardest hit by the pandemic, and we'll make decisions based on need. And so, for example, with the Immigrant Ambassador Program, we went first with the, so there are only 21 schools that are participating, but we looked first at the districts that had the largest number of immigrant populations to start those school programs. It's a very small program right now, only 21 schools. So we're really piloting it to make sure. But we started with the 2 boroughs that have the largest number of immigrants first, and then moved into the other boroughs.
Okay, and if I still have time, if I can ask one more question, I want to piggyback on something that Chair Joseph talked about. So aging out of the system obviously becomes a more significant problem when you account for an L student's education loss during the entirety of the pandemic. How can the DOE create flexibility for older L students to stay in the programs to compensate for the loss during the pandemic?
Thank you for that question, and a very important one. So I think that the response to that question is multi-pronged, and I'll pass it over to Mita in just a moment. But it involves collaboration with local and state agencies, and it also involves some of the planning that we're doing around offering more opportunities for larger undercredited students, older undercredited students, so that we have more institutions that are available to offer very specific supports and instruction that will help them meet the requirements. But Ms., I'll turn that one over to you.
Yes, thank you, Deputy Chancellor. So District 79 has been working really, really hard and very intentionally, diligently to provide the supports to prevent dropout and to work with students who are older. And I know they continue to advocate for an age increase for services. But we are doing everything we can within the programs that we have right now to ensure the students, again, are engaged, re-engage, and that we continue to prevent, right? Best measure is preventative measure. So how do we prevent students? So we look at attendance, obviously, behavior and credit accumulation. And when we speak about behavior, we talk about the social emotional learning. So how do we ensure that these elements are included in this work?
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember. And next we will turn to Councilmember Dinowitz.
Time starts now.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair Joseph. In 2018, I remember every second period, I would sit with one of my students who only spoke Spanish, and I would spend half my time in the classroom in my ICT class translating for her in Spanish, and one of her friends next to her would help out. That was how she and I and her friends spent most of the math class. I would venture to guess most people would say we do everything we can to help students, but it's probably not the best use of time. This is a student who almost exclusively spoke Spanish. She was in this program you keep talking about, the ENL program. I think 3 periods a day she was in ENL class. But that story is not a unique story in my career or in really any teacher's career in the Bronx or anywhere in the city. And I'm just wondering, have you ever audited your programs to evaluate, one, the effectiveness of the programs, and of course the effectiveness of your assessment for the placement? I mean, according to your data, it's clear we need to do more, lower exam scores, lower graduation rates, but I hear more talk of the same program. So have you done auditing or evaluation of your own programming and placement for students?
Thank you for that question, Councilmember Danowitz. Know that we place great value in professional development and certification opportunities for our L teachers. And I think that your question speaks to two different things. And one is ensuring that we are offering very strong tier 1 instruction with the needed supports for the students so that they can, in those classrooms, engage and find success. And so I'll let Mirza talk a little bit more about the professional development and the ways that we're making sure that our educators can meet the needs.
So I'm sorry to interrupt. You understand limited time. I just want to make sure that we're getting to the question. So don't mean to interrupt, guys. I understand professional development exists, and I'm sure it's quality. What I'm asking is if you've evaluated how effective the actual programs that we keep talking about are, not whether the teachers are trained. I have the utmost faith in our educators. The effectiveness of the program and the effectiveness of the placement and the assessments you provide for the students to place them in the right setting.
So I'm going to just ask a clarifying question there,
Sure.
right? Because the program is necessarily with the teachers. Are you asking about how the students are placed into the different types of ENL, so the designations that we just talked about, whether they're placed in transitional or emergent, right? Is that what you're asking about?
I am asking if you've done it, and if not, it's good to know. Not how they are placed, but how accurate the placement is, how flexible it is. If a student is in a school with no transitional bilingual programming, if they are able to be placed in the right setting for themselves, and how effective, if a student is in an ENL class for many years in a row, how are you determining the effectiveness of the programming?
Okay. Yep. Just want to make sure that it's
Sure.
clear that the teacher necessarily is a part of the effectiveness of that programming. And so there is a piece that is about making sure that our teachers are up to par in terms of what we need for that programming. And that means also ensuring that we are aware of what the best approaches for our students currently. Part of that is what Mirza was talking about in terms of extending opportunities to have more folks learn about bilingual programs and the heritage language curriculum that we were talking about. To your point, though, I think that we need to do a better job of assessing whether or not we are having the impact in that moment. And part of what we're doing is using screener data to now get more frequent, blunt information about students to see how they're progressing in terms of their literacy and language levels. And we're using that information to create reading groups or very specific groupings for students where I have witnessed in schools, for example, a strategic reading period where students were working very specifically on the level that they needed to make the progress that they needed. The catch is that was one school, and what we need is to see that with consistency across the city. And so to your point, we are seeing some fantastic practices that are absolutely in line with what we want to see in terms of programming and that are in line with the research and the evidence. That is not yet a consistent practice across the city. And so part of what we are learning is how do we gauge where schools are to provide them specifically with the support that they need so that they can make that kind of progress. Because in schools where they have those types of periods, they were able to make that kind of progress. So I'm going to now shoot it over to Mirza, though, who can answer this question with a lot more specificity.
Time has expired.
Chair, may I be permitted to continue just for a couple more minutes so they can answer and I can ask one more question?
And I would like to add to that question, if I may.
Please go ahead.
So we have the blueprint from New York State Education Department is very clear on how you develop programs for students, for ELLs, and also how you provide monitoring visits. And we rely on our BCO partners, the field ELLs folks, to help us look at schools that we have identified that can use additional support, and they provide monitoring visits, and they provide additional support for these students. I'll keep it short.
Okay, Chair Joseph, may I be permitted to just ask, a couple short questions about data, if they have this data?
Sure, go ahead.
Thank you. So I think what I'll have to do is follow up about some of that, because I think what you're saying doesn't match the experience of so many teachers in our system. I just want to know if you have the vaccination rates of, I know we know we have it per school. Do you have it broken down by L's and non-L's? No, okay. And
No, I don't, but we can certainly, I can see if that's information that is collected in that way. And we can follow up with you. And if you can just be a little more clear, you said that it doesn't match what, the information doesn't match what you have seen about teachers. Were you talking about the vaccination rates or about the?
Sorry, I'll just clarify. I'm speaking quickly because I understand the time constraint. The speaking about the programming and the placement of the programming and whether students are getting what they need. That, you know, I want to match the ideal that we're all talking about and what the kids need with the experiences of what is actually happening on the ground in the schools. The vaccination rate was separate. So I really appreciate following up on that. And just in the same line, I really deeply value how much emphasis is placed on social emotional learning and mental health. As we know, when students came back into the building, there were a number of issues, interpersonal issues that arose between students. And I'm wondering if you have the breakdown of how L's, how their, let's say, incidents, number of incidents or number of times mentioned in ORS reports compared to non-L students. Do you have that data broken down? Are they being suspended more or being recommended for counseling at a higher rate, higher percentage as they're coming back full-time in person compared to their non-L peers?
Thank you. I know that the department does break down data by subgroups. And so we should have that information. I can see if we can get that for you before this call is over. And Council Member Menon, I have some information regarding the questions that you had asked if we have a moment later to follow up with you as well.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, Councilmember Janowitz. Deputy Chancellor, if you just want to give the answers to Councilmember Menon now, that's
that's great.
Councilmember Menon, are you still there? All right, you know what, we'll circle back when she has her video activated because she may not be at the desk. So next we're going to turn to Councilmember Narcisse, followed by Council Members Lewis, Kristan, Brewer, and Stevens. And for the record, we also want to say that we were joined by Councilmember Schulman. We will now turn to Councilmember Narcisse.
Time starts now.
Hi, good afternoon, Chair Rita, Joseph, and all the members and everyone that's doing some fantastic, phenomenal work, and all the questions. I enjoy listening. Some of them already gone from the previous council members. So I thank you. As an individual whose first language is not English, I can empathize with the plot and the challenges that we face, our young folks face in New York. I know that learning English can be extremely difficult in so-called normal environment, but with the COVID pandemic, made it much tougher, and we know that. What does make learning easier for L's is being surrounded by individuals who speak the first language, if they speak the first language. Like I heard CM Denoric referred like in the Spanish, but we know in other languages like Creoles, it's been very, very, very hard. What efforts are being made by DOE to place students who speak the same first language with each other?
Okay. Thank you, Councilmember Narcisse, for that question. As a bilingual teacher and a founding principal of bilingual schools with a transitional bilingual program and dual language program, that's a question that is very near and dear to me. And you are absolutely right. research shows that when you're strategically using the students' home language and instruction, these students move much quickly through the process of learning, not just language, but also being on grade level. So we are working on sustaining, developing, strengthening bilingual education in New York City. That is the plan that we have. How do we increase programs, but at the same time ensure that the programs that we have are strong and are growing, and that students are doing well. So we want to engage the community. We want to engage superintendents. We already know where there are opportunities for growth and development. We are engaging with experts in the field to learn. So we've been doing that for quite a while. I, as a founding principal, I know it's not just opening a program. You need to engage the community. We need to ensure that we have teachers. We need to make sure that we have curricula. We need to make sure that the environment is the right environment for our students. And then we also have to grow. It's easier perhaps to find, a Spanish-speaking teacher, but it's more difficult to find another language. So we want to make sure that we're working with human capital to ensure that we have the teachers to do this program. So we are excited about the learning that we have been doing and the work that we've been doing, in addition to all the professional learning that we have provided teachers to ensure that all students have high quality instruction. And we also, as you heard Deputy Chancellor Quintana speak about piloting a home language curriculum to ensure that we are using students' home language. And we also provided funding for schools to purchase home language libraries. So we are very excited. Thank you very much for this question. And yes, using students' home language is one of the greatest levers to ensure that students are doing well and at the same time are learning English and developing both of their languages. Having two languages is much better than just having one.
And I think
Thank
that's
you.
a big part of why parents are a part of that process is we want to make sure that students are placed in the most supportive program for them. And so we ensure that families are informed of the different program types and the types of services that are available to their students. And so they're part of that process as well.
And the mental status too, mental health, we have to make it accessible, and especially for ELS programs, because a lot of young folks is not receiving mental health the same way that we in those that are born in the country. So we have to be mindful of the taboo that attach around ELMS in terms of mental health too as well.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember. Deputy Chancellor, if you just wanted to provide that data that you had pulled up for Councilmember Menon.
Sure. Let's see. And it was Councilmember Menon's question on students aging out of instructional services during the pandemic. The Department of Education issued a memo encouraging districts to provide overage students with the opportunity to return to school in the 2021-22 school year. So that allowance was made, and high schools allowed overage students who needed continued education or support services in order to graduate with a diploma or an exit credential. They were permitted to return for summer school and, if necessary, attend school in the 2021-22 school year. So there was that allowance made.
Thank you. Next, we're going to turn to Councilmember Lewis, followed by Councilmember Krishnan. We'll turn to Councilmember Lewis.
Time starts now.
Thank you, Chair Joseph, for holding this meeting. As a daughter of immigrants, I remember being a support to my parents and communicating with school administration, and I see the same practice happening till this day. So I wanted to ask the administration, how is the DOE engaging and supporting parents of ELS to understand their children's academic process during parent-teacher conferences and other meetings, especially during the pandemic?
Thank you, Councilmember Lewis. As a parent, I'm sorry, as a parent, but also as a child of immigrant parents who did not see themselves represented in the school and had a really hard time, that question matters. And we absolutely want to empower our parents and our families as partners, and they have to have a trusting relationship with the school, but mostly they have to have access. And so, Cleaver, if you want to talk a little bit about how we've made that possible with schools in general.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Deputy Chancellor. So the effort around just general parent awareness on initiative programs, parent-teacher conferences, it follows suit with whatever initiatives are rolled out by the DOE. Everything follows in translation. But in addition to those standard messages, we do have a network of language access coordinators at the school level who work with borough offices, their field language access coordinators, to make sure that we raise awareness and alert folks at the school level to always think about language access. We're always trying to make sure that it's something proactive, not reactive, and something that's embedded in processes, plans, calendars, to make sure to make arrangements for interpretation, to make sure that flyers that go out to families promoting an upcoming conference are translated in languages. And these are the efforts that are happening behind the scenes, and slowly but surely the culture is changing. There's still a lot of work to be done, obviously, but this is the value of having a network of folks out there, because at a central unit, we could only send messages so often, and they're often mixed in with 100 other email messages that principals or schools get. But we also have the ability to contact and appoint people at schools to make sure that they're always raising a language access flag, to raise awareness about being proactive when it comes to parent-teacher conferences. We know where they are, when these dates are every single year. It happens twice a year, so it's not catching us off guard. And so making arrangements, preparing, reserving interpreters, having the over the phone interpretation services readily available as well, are all things that we share as best practices to staff through training and just general communications.
Thank you, Executive Director Palmer. It would be great if we could work with your team so that that's effectively communicated to all communities so that they're aware that resources there. The second question I have is, how does the DOE plan to close the achievement gap and graduation gap between Ls and non-Ls?
Thank you for that question. And I especially appreciated hearing you ask to be a partner in the work with Executive Director Palmer. I think it's incredibly important to hear that. And that would actually be part of what we would ask, is to have the council be partners with us. As far as how we're aiming to close the achievement gap, I did want to point out first that those are steps that we've taken already in the 3 years that MIRSA has been here. We went from 34% graduation rate to almost 46% graduation rate. And in this past year, it was at 60% graduation rate. And we know that that one's a little bit different than our other years. But even with that 46, we've made tremendous growth in a short amount of time. Not enough, and certainly not at the point where we are satisfied yet. And so part of that is going back to the question that Council Member Dinowitz had asked, right, is making sure that our programs are actually effective. They're grounded in research and evidence-based practices, and creating that consistency citywide. And so that does include the professional development of our teachers, and it includes making sure that we have the right resources. And so you heard Mr. talk a little bit about the heritage language curriculum. We've talked about expanding our bilingual programs, and just making sure that students have an opportunity. I went to a school where I actually got to watch. It's a school that has both dual language in Chinese and Spanish to reflect the needs of the neighborhood. But I had an opportunity to see students in a heritage language setting, learning about literacy strategies and having fantastic conversations about the text in their respective languages, knowing that over time they were practicing English as well, but they're learning how to do that meaning making, which is incredibly important, and learning to value what they bring to the table, their own language, their own capacity. And so that's part of what we want to make sure our schools know and can do. And when we do that, we know that those rates will continue to increase. And the other piece is, for our students who have not had those opportunities to date, how do we catch them? And that's part of what Misa was sharing as well, is what are the types of school opportunities, whether it's expanding CTE, whether it's expanding our transfer schools, what are other opportunities to catch students so that we engage them in school and can make sure that we're offering them opportunities to stay, to leave with the skills and the knowledge to be successful beyond high school. And so that part of that is assessing what's here, building on what's working, and revising where it's not. And that will be a process that will take time. And we hope that you'll be on that journey with us over the next several years.
Of course, Deputy Chancellor, that approach that you just shared, this is my last question. How could the mayor's preliminary budget affect ELS and the approach that you just shared? Thank you.
Thank you. And so, I think NIFA can probably answer this question about how we can apply those funds, but I think we've launched some pilot programs that could really be expanded. We want to make sure that we are creating curricula that is reflective of the needs of our students. But also, I think incredibly important is going to be to hear, or rather for you to share maybe what you're hearing from the community and what you know are needs that we can address, so that if there are funds that we can apply, we make sure that we're applying them where it's needed.
Deputy Chancellor Quintana, thank you, and Councilmember Lewis, thank you for that question. Closing the achievement gap and increasing graduation rate is definitely at the center of the goals, the work that we do. And like I said before, we're looking at a three approach. What are the program and services? What is that capacity building that we need to do? And how do we ensure the family and community partners are working with us? And we're working with them at the same time, and building that piece is extremely important. I want to, and I want to add just a bit that again, as a high school professional, I knew that making sure that the instruction was strong, that students were engaged, and that families were part of the decision-making process was extremely important. This is why if we have launched a college and career readiness initiatives, like the college and career readiness school allocation plan, where schools develop a plan of how they're going to engage their students, how are they going to prepare a plan for students to be successful for college. Also, the prep program, how do we ensure that families and students are involved? And also, it's a tiny pilot, but very promising, the Immigrant Ambassador Program. How do we ensure that families of immigrant students, and not necessarily ELLs, these are students who are immigrants that are coming from immigrant families, are also have a pathway for college and career. So closing the achievement gap is at the center of what we do in professional learning, and providing curricula, and providing resources for schools, engaging families, and definitely partnering with you in this work. And at the same time, continuously learning from research-based, how do we make this happen better? Thank you.
Thank you, Council. Thank you, Deputy Chief Academics Officer. Councilmember Krishnan, I'm just going to ask your indulgence if Councilmember Stevens can quickly cut in line in front of you. She has to run somewhere, but I promise we'll turn to you as soon as she's done with her questions. Okay, I saw an absolutely being worded there. So Councilmember Stevens, thank you.
Time starts now.
Thank you so much. I'll be very quick. But I just had a question, and I believe Councilmember Lewis and Narcisse already kind of alluded to it, but I had a more question, because we know that students who have support from family members who speak English is just so much more successful. Could you talk a little bit about how you're partnering with like CBOs and ELL programs to support them? Because I find that a lot of times we kind of just talk about the kids and them being in school, but we know once they get home and they're with their parents so much longer, that support is just not happening. So what is the collaboration looking like between these programs? How are we making sure that there's a through line and a connection? And not just, and I think sometimes we just focus on like the elementary schools, but even through high school, those things are just as important. And so could you talk a little bit more about that, please?
Absolutely, Keelan.
Yes, thank you for that important question. We are so excited. We have developed guidance for schools on how to partner with families, but we have also provided professional learning for CBOs on how to engage immigrants and ELL families. And we partner with CBOs to help us understand and help us have increased reach for our families. As it was alluded here before, it's really a wraparound service, right? It's not just the instruction, but it's also the social emotional learning. It's also ensuring that students are feeling affirmed and welcome in the environments. And then you're right, as they go home, how then families can support them, or if they go to an after school program, how are they supported there? And we have resources that we have shared, and we can share it here with how to support families of immigrant and multilingual learners in schools. And then also we have partners that help us develop resources for families as well.
And it's something that I'm really excited about with this and the administration too. A priority that Chancellor Banks has is to make sure that we're increasing the number of minority and women-owned businesses that are participating with the Department of Education. And so one of those really exciting conversations that we've already had are about what are the organizations that are in the communities in which our students live that can be a bigger role in the lives of our students, so that we're really targeting the people who are in the neighborhood, who know the neighborhood, who are potentially much like the families of the students and speak in those languages as well, to be part of the partnership with school and families. And so really expanding from the current list of CBOs that we have to others that might be better representation and more local.
Yeah, thank you for that. And please share with any information that you might have with that. And I'm excited that you're trying to expand to more local organizations. But, you know, through that, we also have to work on our procurement process, which is another issue because we can expand it, but if we're not able to get them the payment that they need, it becomes an issue. But thank you for those answers. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Councilmember Executive Director Palma has a quick answer for you as well.
Thank you. I just wanted to add something we're really excited about with regards to working with immigrant groups and community-based organizations. Thanks to the City Council's recent investment with regards to language access, one of the initiatives that we're rolling out is to actually do exactly what you just described, was to engage groups to help us bridge those gaps that exist in communities, hard to reach communities, low literacy, digital literacy, and to come up with creative ways to engage and inform and to help amplify the services and supports that are currently available. We have we've received about 12 proposals, about a dozen proposals so far from different CBOs from throughout the city, which we'll be going through the next couple of weeks. And we're really excited to partner with these groups to make sure that we do even more amplification of language access and engagement in general.
Yeah, and thank you for that. I really appreciate that. Sounds really exciting. I would love more information and any way I can support in that effort. But just one more statement before I run off. I just think that it's important that we're not only getting people access and working with CBOs, but we're having a pipeline of people who are in the pipeline for teachers to come up to be able to teach these languages. I think that that is something we often fail to do because there's so many languages and so many people, but we need to start creating a pipeline and making sure that all of our teachers are multilingual and making more of an effort to make sure that's happening. So thank you.
Yes, and we absolutely agree. Thank you, Councilmember Stevens.
Thank you, Councilmember Stevens, and thank you, Councilmember Krishnan. We'll now turn to you for your questions.
Time starts now.
Thank you so much. First, thank you, Chair Joseph, for today's meeting and for raising these issues that are extremely important. And no doubt we face them going forward as we come out of this pandemic for our schools. As a public school parent of two small children as well, these are issues that I'm also observing and living in Jackson Heights and Elmhurst, two of the largest and most diverse immigrant communities on the planet, where bilingual education and dual language are so important for us. This is the perspective that I bring. So I want to make one comment and then one question. My comment is just to echo what Councilmember Joseph had said before too, about really ensuring, it was very, very concerning to me, and I know many of my colleagues too, to see the way in which, especially under the last administration, ACS was being called to intervene in instances where students, either students in shelter or, and of course, otherwise students who are ELLs, who oftentimes were affected disproportionately by the lack of technological access, as we talked about, where ACS was called to intervene in these families too. And I think that's shocking and really appalling, and that should not be happening. So I know Chair Joseph touched on that question, and I wanted to echo that's something that's very important to me too. And I hope that this administration too, and this DOE will pay special attention to not having ACS intervene in those situations. It's very concerning. I'd like to shift gears to the question I wanted to ask on dual language and bilingual education. This is an area, as I mentioned before, coming from Jackson Heights and Elmhurst, that's very important to me. And I think it's crucial to have dual language programs in our schools. But one of the things that I see, working especially with dual language experts here in Jackson Heights and Elmhurst that have been strong advocates on these issues, is that although we've gotten more dual language programs, only 7% of multilingual learners are enrolled in these programs by the DOE's own data. And if we want to talk about dual language and bilingual education really being to foster bilingualism and biliteracy, especially among multilingual learners, it is crucial that we have far more MLLs in these programs, and that the programs are geared especially towards and centering our multilingual learners. In addition to that, here in Jackson Heights and Elmhurst, we could use far more in the way of dual language programs. I'd like to see a dual language program in every single public school in my district. And for example, at PS 69 in Jackson Heights, we have a large Bangladeshi population. We still don't have Bangla, a dual language program for Bangla as well. It's only been in Spanish in some schools, and in Mandarin too. But the importance, my question would be, how can we ensure an increased participation of multilingual learners in dual language programs? And how can we ensure that we expand the number of dual language programs available, particularly really all over the city, but especially in districts like mine, where that's a core priority?
Thank you, Councilmember Christian. We are absolutely in agreement with both statements. One regarding the concern about ACS, and two, this desire to expand our bilingual education services. Only 17% of our Ls receive bilingual education at this point, and so I'm going to turn it over to Mirtha to talk a little bit about that plan and what we're looking to do, because we are in absolute agreement. We need more of that, and that's a great way for our students to learn and our communities to thrive.
Thank you, Councilmember Krishnan, for that question. And I just want to start by saying I would love to speak with you more about how we can develop a specific plan for your district. The reality is that we want to ensure, we want to start with partnering and planning. I don't want to go and tell a district, you're going to go and open a bilingual program. Really, when a bilingual program starts from the families, for example, in my school, the way the dual language program was open, because the parents came to me and said, we have a TBE, now we want to do a language because this is what our population needs. So we want to make sure that we're partnering and planning and being very strategic in that planning with the community and the school. We also want to build capacity, like I said before, in the school and with the families and the community, and design a program that is appropriate for the community. And you're absolutely right. We want to ensure that dual language programs are at least 50% ELLs to ensure that both students, population, English proficient students and English language learners are benefiting from the dual language program, which is an amazing program. We also want to ensure that there is a strong implementation and support that goes beyond, right? That there's this continuity of services, that it doesn't close after the first year because the plan wasn't there. And we want to, speaking about the scaling and sustaining is extremely important. So I would love to sit down with you to map out, the district and really good and communicate with the families, and also work with the superintendents to ensure that we are being very strategic and intentional about this development. So sign me on.
Time expired.
Same here, absolutely. And looking forward to working together and welcome partnership on this issue in my district as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember. And next we will turn to Councilmember Aviles, followed by Councilmembers Schulman, Sanchez, Lee, and Gutierrez. We'll turn to Councilmember Aviles.
Time starts.
Thank you so much, Chair Joseph, for hosting this hearing, and thank you everyone for being here, my colleagues, and certainly our education partners. I have a two-part question. One, I'd love to talk about here a little bit more in terms of data provided last year. 15% of our ELL students also have IEPs. In my district, District 38 in South Brooklyn, I would venture to say that that percentage is higher in my anecdotal experience in the schools, both as a mom and a parent advocate. But I'd like to know, we understand that there have been staffing shortages that really have plagued special education specifically. How has the special education recovery services being rolled out for our IEP students who are also ELLs? If you could talk a little bit about that student that sits at that intersection. And also how much funding is being dedicated to this population in particular?
Thank you, Councilmember Other. An incredibly important question. And when we think about the shortage of staffing, this is an area where we absolutely see a shortage of staffing. So my latest data actually shows that 27% of our Ls are students with IEPs. So as you guessed, an even larger number than you'd originally seen. One of the things that we have about 2,000 teachers currently with bilingual licenses, but where we're seeing a shortage isn't just with teachers, it's with our bilingual speech teachers and with bilingual counseling services as well. There are 325 bilingual guidance counselors, approximately 400 bilingual school psychologists, 250 bilingual school social workers, and only 200 bilingual speech teachers. We have about 20 teacher vacancies for bilingual teachers and 29 vacancies, including those for speech improvement. And as you can guess, the students not served for counseling, 21.4% of our bilingual counseling services have not been rendered, and 11.6% in speech and language therapy. That's a big concern for us. And so we are hiring 32 new staff were hired this year. 3 additional staff have been identified and are in the hiring process. As you may know, we're in the middle of a freeze, and so we're in that process. And then 15 vacancies have been identified for by supervisors, but no candidates have been identified to date. And so the candidate pool is not as large as we would like. And that's actually an initiative that Ms. and her team have been working on with our HR department, is how do we better recruit, develop, and retain bilingual teachers, counselors, and speech service providers. And one of the wonderful things about this administration is that we have really been emphasizing working collaboratively across divisions. It's something I'm incredibly excited about. And so not only have we been working with other divisions, but within this same division of teaching and learning, we're working very closely with special education for DCIS to think about what are the different ways that we can ensure that students' needs are being met, and that we're allocating funding to hire speech and language providers. We just allocated, actually I don't have how much funding, but we're moving monies from one area to another to make sure that we can actually hire service providers. So I don't have funding amounts, but we absolutely are prioritizing this. This is a huge area of improvement for us, and it's one where we have already started to take steps to make sure that we're meeting those needs. So thank you for this question. And obviously, if any of your districts have folks who are interested in becoming teachers, we absolutely want to build up, or counselors or therapists, we want to build up from the community out. So we welcome folks to be part of the process with us.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. It is definitely an area that should have no freeze at all. Given the shortage, there's no room for a freeze here. We should be investing heavily. So thank you for that work. I just wanted to make a quick comment in terms of really commend the transitional care being provided in the Immigrant Ambassador Program. And we know that the transfer programs for high school work really well for our ELLs, but they're just way too limited, right? All being concentrated in Manhattan with very little for the outer borough, for our communities and our students. So of course, I would be remiss to say we really need to see an expansion in that program. The model works, we know it. So there's no rocket science here, it's a matter of will. I also just want to say, that being said, that this model of transitional support would be instrumental at the family welcome centers for newly arrived families, right?
Time expired.
Chair, if I could just finish that quick comment.
Absolutely.
Sure. Okay. Sorry about that. So the transitional support would really be instrumental for the family welcome centers for those newly arrived families, particularly at this earlier stage of elementary and even pre-K, right? We shouldn't have to get those services in high school only. So I would just love to see if we could create a similar model to the ambassador, but at the much earlier time.
Thank you for the idea.
Thank you, Councilmember. And next we will turn to Councilmember Schulman.
Time starts now.
Thank you very much. I want to thank Chair Joseph for this important hearing, and also to congratulate Chair Joseph on your first hearing as chair of the Education Committee. Congratulations. So a couple of things. One is I wanted to reiterate what my colleague, Councilmember Dinowitz, talked about, the Ls and the non-Ls in terms of the vaccination rates. If you don't have that, I want you to think about doing that, because it helps us to figure out where we need to put resources in terms of getting the vaccinations up. And also, I want to ask, my understanding is that mask wearing has been a barrier a little bit for English language learners in the classroom, and particularly since kids are back in school. So I want to know what you're doing in terms of that. And also, with the mask mandates now loosening up, how are you going to deal with kids that may still want to wear a mask, but they need to have English language learning services and all of that?
Good questions. Thank you, Councilmember Schulman. As far as the vaccination data, I'm not sure if we can capture vaccination data by student information, but we could potentially. We would have to look into that to see whether or not there would be any concerns about data privacy but I appreciate that the suggestion is to think about where we need to provide more support or do a greater push for vaccination. As far as the masks, you're absolutely right. Those masks, I had to take mine off because you couldn't hear me on a microphone here, right? And so they can be a bit of a hindrance in terms of speaking and hearing. City Hall is reviewing the data, and I know that they are set to make a decision and an announcement by the end of the week, and so we'll know whether or not schools will be removing masks. But I appreciate that other view, right? That is, what about the kids who want to continue to wear masks? And I know that in many spaces, masks will be encouraged publicly, and so I'm sure that folks will be wearing masks in many spaces. I think that's something that we can begin to ask already before this announcement gets made, so that we can start to think about what are some of the ways that we can address that, to either normalize it or to offer different types of masks and see what our options are. So thank you for bringing that up.
What I want to say, so the English language learners, because a lot of times they learn from watching their friends or their peers, in terms of them talking. So if they're wearing a mask, it's a little bit of a hindrance. Mm-hmm. So I want to make sure that that's not a barrier to them in terms of learning and all of that. And then the third thing that I would like to ask is, as an LGBTQ member of the council, I want to know, there are a lot of people, a lot of kids in the immigrant communities who are LGBTQ, and they have other barriers in terms of, coming to class and dealing with social stigmas and things like that? Are there ways that, and particularly those that don't speak English very well, do you have services for them in particular? Or social services, or, you know?
We do have social services for our LGBTQ community, LGBTQ plus community. I'm not sure if they're specific in different languages or for very specific communities. So that's something that interests me very much. I would like to look into that. And if you would like to, connect to have further conversations about that, one of the things that's, again, great about this administration is the cross communication. And so really working with also other divisions to think about whether that falls under student well-being or communication with our superintendents to really think about what are the different ways that we can create opportunities and services for students. This is thank you for asking this question. I'm definitely going to continue to think about this, so I appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councilmember. And next we'll turn to Councilmember Sanchez.
Time starts now.
You should get a prompt asking you to accept the unmute. There we go.
Okay.
Now we
All
can
right.
hear
Thank you so
Ooh.
much. Excellent. Thank you. First and foremost, and the Department of Education, thank you all for testifying here today. This topic is really important to me personally. I was an ELL student. I've always said my whole life ELL, so today I'm going to say L to match up with everyone else. But I just want to thank you for holding this hearing, and especially for me in my district, we're about 75% we're 75% English language as a second language in our district. So my question is really about the fact that ELLs have a right to receive bilingual instruction or English as a second language, English as a new language instruction, but many ELLs do not receive this instruction during the pandemic. So given the immense challenges that ELLs faced in participating meaningfully during remote learning and the lack of language support, how, if at all, is the DOE now ensuring that ELLs that did not receive their mandated English as a new language instruction are able to catch up? And are there new investments that are going to accompany these changes?
Can we go ahead and unmute the Deputy Chancellor? There we go.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Thank you. Great question, Councilmember Sanchez. And I too was a multilingual or am a multi-language learner. And so appreciate the personalization of that question. Absolutely. We want to make sure that in all of our classrooms, high quality instruction, high quality teachers are what we have in place, because that's going to offer our English language learners the highest impact lever to support their academic achievement and to make sure that they feel comfortable and confident in the school spaces. In addition to that, we part of the funding that we talked about, stimulus funding that we talked about earlier, was provided for schools to design targeted support plans for their ELLs. And so much of those additional services are being offered through those support plans. In addition, as a whole, not for our multilingual learners specifically, but as a whole, we are looking at pilots for programs and opportunities like embedded tutoring, extended day opportunities, and the programming that we will bring into our summer session as well. And so there are those opportunities that are beyond the school day, but the most important part for the students is going to be during their school day in that core content with the support of the teacher and just making sure that we have adequate supports available from the central office and from the BCOs so that teachers have what they need in order to provide students with those supports. Lisa, if you want to add to that, I know that this
Yes, thank you. in addition to what Deputy Chancellor has indicated, and I said this a little bit before, we work with the multi-tiered system of support to strengthen the core instruction, and then at the same time, provided guidance for schools on how to provide intervention services for students and what kind of digital materials they could use to ensure that these students would, we work with unfinished learning for our students.
I also want to add that part of what we talked about earlier was the use of screeners. And so the screeners are incredibly important to provide us, again, with quick data, right? They're snapshots of how our students are doing and how they're progressing. And so those screeners give teachers information about whether or not their students have fallen behind and what else they need. And in addition to that, our schools have access to, as Misa just mentioned, a number of digital resources, so Panorama, Scholastic's Word, and then I've even seen in use during some of those structured reading periods, Starry, and so there are lots of opportunities for the students to receive those embedded supports where they're working in small groups that is very specific to their need, their literacy levels, so that they can receive supports in real time.
Thank you so much. And a quick follow-up, if I have enough time, is around parents and interactions with parents. So although schools are required to hold a yearly meeting with parents of ELLs to discuss their children's programming and progress, I understand that these rarely happen. So what is the DOE going to be doing to ensure that schools are meeting these requirements and engaging the parents of ELLs?
Councilmember Sanchez, thank you very much for that question. It should be the first meeting of the year with the families, so we will continue to inform and inform schools and about the importance. Sometimes people don't understand the importance of it, but absolutely schools should have a meeting with all of their families and talking about the programs. And that's a perfect opportunity for them to elicit their interest in developing a program if there isn't one. So we will follow up. Thank you.
Time expired.
Thank you. And next we will turn to Councilmember Lee.
Time starts now.
Oops, sorry. Hi, everyone. Congrats to Chair Joseph for your first hearing. This is exciting, and thanks to those who are here from DOE. I appreciate all of you and the work that you have been going through, especially during the pandemic. And I'm just kind of putting on my previous hat in the CBO social service world of things, where we provided services specifically to Korean immigrant families, and did more on the adult literacy side of things versus the youth. But I think there's a lot there that is very similar. But I wanted to actually piggyback off. I had two questions actually. One was piggybacking off of what Councilmember Stevens was saying before, and just out of curiosity, because you guys had mentioned that you're contracting or had contracted and identified certain groups and nonprofits that you're partnering with for the translation piece. And obviously, we know it's not just simply about translation or interpretation, but it's really understanding the cultural nuances as well. And so I just wanted to know what efforts you guys did to outreach to certain groups out there in the community, because I know that there's always an open RFP process, but was there more intentional outreach beyond just posting the RFP? And I know that if you're in the phase right now of figuring out who those contractors are, you probably can't discuss it, but I just wanted to know if you guys, my first question was around just the process of outreach that you did, which groups and how you reached out to the community.
Thank you. And thank you for that question. Incredibly important for us to consider not just the language needs, but also how we interact with different groups of people. And Cleaver, I don't know if you want to talk a little bit more about the partnering with immigrant-led community-based organizations, and especially much of that was able to happen, again, thank you to the council, due to funding that we received from the council. So Cleaver, do you want to talk a little bit about that? Or anything else you think might help answer this question? I know that mute is a hard thing to come by, so.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for that question, council member. Yes, the funding came obviously from the city council in hopes of just closing these gaps, filling the areas that were identified as deficiencies in the past. And right from the beginning, we engage and we're heavily engaged with a group of advocates, community-based organizations to think through how best to implement some of the concerns, how to respond to some of the concerns that were raised because of the pandemic. And we've kept with this group meeting every couple of weeks consistently for the last several months to make sure that the work streams and the initiatives that stemmed from this funding, that they were partners in that process. And so this group was something that is solely focused on language access, which had not been done at a consistent level in the past, which is very, very exciting. So this is this group that helped us kind of articulate this piece. In addition to that, we also worked with our partners in the Office of Multilingual Learners to make sure that their networks of advocates and community groups are also aware of this opportunity. We also engaged the Mayor's Office of Immigrant Affairs. So we covered as many different areas to make sure that word got out about this. It wasn't simply just on the website or something that you have to dig for. We wanted to make sure it was out there. And so we're very excited that we have had the responses that we've received so far, and hopefully there'll be more to come.
Yep, and we've offered these language access kits and other opportunities, but the reality is, Councilmember Lee, that we don't have all of the ideas or may not necessarily have what's best for each community. So we absolutely welcome an opportunity or accept recommendations to be considered because that will help us get better at what we do.
No, that's awesome, because I feel like oftentimes on the community-based organization side of things, like we were like, oh my gosh, there's so much we could do to help, and we wanted to help and we wanted to offer that support, but we just didn't know how to get at the table. So I think that was one of the things. So I would love to, at some point soon, recommend any groups that maybe are not on the list. So that's one thing. And the second thing, maybe I'm opening up a can of worms by asking this question, but how's the coordination between DOE as well as the DYCD after school programs? Because it's like housed under two city agencies that have their own way of doing things. And I gotta say, as a provider in my previous hat, it was frustrating because we wanted to provide the culturally competent in-language services to these families, especially in the after-school setting, but oftentimes it was either the administration of the schools or the principals or just the contracting process, I would say, right, that sort of became a barrier. And so I just wanted to know what your thoughts are and what you can do to better coordinate that effort with DYCD, because oftentimes a lot of these families do need the after-school support as well. And so how do you continue that service?
Time has expired.
May I respond or is this time expired?
Oh, no, please go ahead.
Okay, great, thank you. Thank you for that question, Councilmember Lee. And while I can't speak necessarily to what's happened in the past in terms of the after school, what I can say is summer school planning with DYCD, City Hall, and other partners has been an incredible experience. And it has been an opportunity for us to really get to know the other agencies, to understand where each of us are coming from, to put our needs on the same table and have to negotiate and work together so that we understand. Because from a parent's perspective or from a student's perspective, we're all the same agency. They have one experience, right? After school is after school. It doesn't matter to them who's offering it, right? Summer school is summer school. It doesn't matter. And so we're working together very closely. We're meeting at least 3 times a week and talking about the ways that we can support one another. And in fact, we'll be offering this spring workshops together so that we each understand the role the other will be playing for summer, so that we're prepared to support and build off one another to have greater alignment. So I absolutely thank you for bringing that up. I won't say by any means that we've got it down. There's a lot of work and a lot of room for us to learn, but we hear that need and fortunately have the right people in place to begin to respond to that. So thank you for bringing that up.
Thank you. And next we'll turn to Councilmember Gutierrez, followed by Councilmember De La Rosa, and then back to the chair. But we'll first turn to Councilmember Gutierrez.
Time starts now.
Thank you. And thank you, Chair Joseph. You are doing an amazing job. All your years of educating. I have three questions. So I will just ask them and you answer them when you can. The first one, and I make this a point to do this in all the hearings that I attend when speaking about language access. Can you explain the process or highlight the process for the DOE when you are looking to integrate a new language, or when you have students from a particular language that is not at the school, for example, Quechua, which is an indigenous language for me in Ridgewood and parts of Bushwick in my district. It's a growing population, as I believe it's also in parts of the Bronx. And so I have a keen interest in wanting to connect with those families. And I know from my time spent at some of these schools, there has been traditionally a barrier in connecting with these families and making sure that the students are supported. So I'm not sure. I just checked the DOE website. I know it's not one of the like 10 languages, but if you could speak to it, if there is something in the pipeline for these families, or just highlight what the process would be, and then what it takes to integrate this new language, and what it takes for the DOE to kind of build something out for these families. Second is, how do we prevent EL resources from being jeopardized or cut in gentrifying communities? What I've seen in Bushwick, what we've seen in Williamsburg, and likely what we'll see in Ridgewood is under enrollment. Families are getting displaced, folks moving in aren't necessarily having children right away. And so we see a lot of open seats in our school districts, and we see a lot of loss of funds. And so unfortunately, what also happens is that our L students, some of them that are able to remain, are still very much in need. So how does the DOE grapple with the threat of resources being cut, with the obvious need that there are still folks that need help? And then lastly, just as the tech chair for the council, what were some of the unique challenges, to the best of your ability, that L students were facing working remote, L students and their families? And what are some of the lessons learned or best practices that we can start to integrate into the future for the way that we look at supporting L students digitally, whether remote learning or at schools? Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to turn it over first to Mirza, actually, to answer some of those questions. I don't know that we had looked very closely at the impact of gentrification, but certainly have considered the impact of enrollment declines in different communities. And so really important for you to frame it in that way for us. So I appreciate that question. Mirza, do you want to speak a little bit? Yep. Okay.
Sure. So we have lower incidence languages, and while we might not have all the resources for these languages, we try to look at also at the school. Sometimes the schools have resources. This is one of the reasons we send to schools money for them to open to purchase home language libraries and lower incidence languages. And we continue to find ways to support the lower incidence languages. So we'd like to hear more from you, Council Member Gutierrez, on how what are the needs of these families, and how can we continue to support them, and what resources they would need.
Absolutely. I'd love to do that with you. Let's do it. There's a ton of need. They're a huge population in my district and in other parts of the city. And the beautiful thing is that they're staying. And so I want to be able to support them. They're active, they're going to after school programs. So I want to support them. Thank you.
And schools have funding for translation interpretation as well.
Yeah, but you need someone to do the interpretation. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember. And finally, we will turn to Councilmember De La Rosa.
Time starts now.
Hello, hi, how are you? I want to thank Chair Joseph for this wonderful and informative hearing. I have a few questions, and some of them may have been asked already. I had to jump off at some point during the hearing, but my question is mostly about students who come in, and it usually happens in some of our high schools more than in the elementary schools, but students who come in after like the October 31st funding deadline, that are considered over the counter, although I don't like that use of language, but they come into the schools after the funding decisions have been made for per pupil allocation. And in my district in Upper Manhattan, most of those students are coming in from Latin American countries, and they need extra funding in order to supply services directly for the L population. Can you walk us through what it looks like when a student comes in after that deadline and what services are offered to those schools that are taking in those students?
So thank you for that question. And as a person who lived my entire career in New York City at high school level, I truly understand that process. Again, schools have funding, and then their funding is revisited after the October 31st to ensure that the services, all students must receive services. And also schools have a way of asking for additional funding if needed, and additional support. So we are aware there's a process also to hold harmless schools if they have loss of register, but in the case of when their students are coming rolling throughout the entire year, we ensure that the services, the schools is able to provide the services, and at the same time, if the school needs additional support, to contact us to help them with that.
Great. And this might have been asked already, but as far as the academic recovery funding that was allocated, what does the allocation look like for English language learners? And what is the type of supports that exist right now for like small group counseling, small group instruction for L students within the current structure, especially during the COVID-19 pandemic?
Thank you for that question. So we did review that, but it's essentially it's a distribution of funding and resources to schools so that they can do everything from participating with Dream Squads, do some post-secondary readiness. There are family leadership and digital literacy programs. We sent culturally responsive home language libraries, wellness checks, so a number of programs that have been funded using that academic recovery funding. In addition, we have ensured, so rather to the question that you asked about the small group portion, making sure that our schools are using a range of data, including the screener data, student work, to monitor progress, and really thinking about the different diagnostics and ways that they can collect data on their students. And that's where the small group comes in. And for that kind of instruction, we've actually offered a range of professional development sessions, anything from how to collect and analyze the data to actually how to do some of that small group work with templates and conferencing and things like that. And there are also Spanish bilingual, dual language, and transitional programs that have been offered, and then other ENL standalone programs, so National Geographic Panorama, the digital ENL standalone lessons for elementary, middle, and high, but a number of different programs that have been offered that can be used with a rotation model where teachers really make decisions about different groups of students, and during a designated time in the day can work with the group of students that may need that one-on-one support or small group support, while the others are working independently on other pieces. So there's also very specific interventions for students who are reading at different grade levels behind. So STARI is the program that I've mentioned that I've actually seen in action in schools, that includes book lists and really specific strategies and creates common language and consistent practice across the school. We use Passport that I mentioned earlier too, with small group teacher-led instruction, and that small group is 2 to 4 students. Again, it's a stations teaching model, so there's a lot of opportunity for that. The concern that we brought up earlier when Councilmember Dinowitz had asked was that it's not consistent across all of our schools yet, and so that's where we really want to make sure is how do we know how well schools are using these resources, and then really paying attention to the impact. And that's part of what we're teaching teachers to do, is to take a look at that blunt data that those assessments offer throughout.
Great. And just to piggyback one last second, I heard Councilmember Sanchez and Aviles put this very eloquently, but one of the troubles that we see, I was a former L student myself, with parents that spoke not a word of English. Having that help when a child brings home homework that for many of our parents, it may not even be at the grade level that they ever completed, for example, or just the language, the way it's explained. Having that support for parents is super important. I like the Councilmember Aviles' idea about the welcome centers, but if there's any other resources that we can actually bring into our schools for parents, it's important for us to pilot, parent academies and things of that nature to help with the gaps that exist in the home. Thank you so much.
Thank you for that, especially given the role that parents played this past year, really helping with not this past year, the past 2 years, right, with helping with schooling at home. So I appreciate that. Cleaver, I saw that you had hand up.
Yes, thank you, Deputy Chancellor. I wanted to piggyback a little bit on what was just said, but also respond to Councilmember Gutierrez's comment earlier, which I think was a great point. The DOE proactively and systemically does things in 9 languages, right? The top 9, and with English, that covers about 95% of our parent population. That sounds great. The tricky part there is that there's 160 languages we're not covering because the city is so diverse. And as my colleague Mirza mentioned, schools do receive a small budget of funding for translation interpretation. That's intended to cover local needs and local languages that aren't covered with the top 9. But to your point, Council member, like who's doing the work? Who's doing the work in these languages? And that's something that we want to get into, and would love to partner with you to identify you, but anybody else in this meeting to partner to identify these new language groups. Our setting is always evolving. These new language groups coming in constantly, and to find out who these are, where they're coming from, what languages are being spoken. It allows us to work with our contracted vendors so that they can start identifying these resources for us to lean on. One of the services that is heavily leaned on by schools is our over-the-phone service, which is available in 350 different languages. So that's a start. But we have to find ways to professionalize folks in this field. Speaking of the parents and giving them an opportunity to grow, being the first interpreter, the Quechua interpreter would be fantastic. We don't have any Quechua interpreters. It's very rare, for example, right? But there are families who may begin that profession, and maybe there's an opportunity here to help us bridge that communication gap using the community itself to be the interpreter in the long run, to professionalizing that effort and so forth. So a lot of exciting opportunities, but I think if we can be further engaged to identify where these languages are and what languages are emerging, I think we'll be better off.
That's a fantastic idea, Cleaver, and how we can all work together to affirm our families, to really allow folks to see what they bring to the table as value, and they can add, right? And so thank you I love that suggestion of using the community to create that research.
And that concludes your colleagues' questions, Chair, so I turn it back to you.
Wonderful. Thank you, colleagues. Great questions. And definitely, we know communities are formed every 10 years. So languages and communities change every 10 years, and that includes language. I know that one of the things we talked about in sustaining and maintaining our multi-language learner population is teacher training. Teacher training will be very, very important in terms of ESL, bilingual education, also with special ed backing. Speech pathologist is a shortage area. I had to wait almost a year to get a bilingual speech therapist for one of my students. I had to threaten to burn the school down in order for my child to get that. Oh yeah, I did. So I was able to get one, and there was only one for D17. I came out of D17. There was only one bilingual speech pathologist, one for the whole district. So that child was waiting so long by the time she came to me in 5th grade So those are the type of training that we need to create for our teachers, the pathways to create. I became an ESL teacher with Common Branch. I got an extension, which was like 15 credits, but I already had a background in bilingual education and I saw the shortage area for ESLs. So I'd like to hear from you guys, what are the pathways to creating more multilingual, bilingual teachers, ENL teachers, also with special education. Some of our students also have a double whammy. They're English language learners and yet they have a learning disability. So we have to be able to meet them. So I would love to hear what great ideas you guys have for pathways for teachers to become bilingual teachers, ESL teachers, and so on and so forth.
Thank you. Thanks for that question, Chair Joseph, and Mitch, I'll let you answer most of it. But we are working with our Human Resources Department to actively recruit bilingual teachers, speech providers, counselors through both traditional and alternative pathways. And those, include the ones that you already know, right? So teaching fellows, teaching collaboratives, and the local universities. What we, I think, are excited about here is that we're supporting teachers to obtain a bilingual extension, as you just mentioned, through the subsidized bilingual extension program, the STEP program, and our extended certification program. So we have some other programs in place to support educators in getting those extensions. And I think that that's going to be really important for us right now, particularly because we're seeing this shortage. We also have the application and funding support for the state's teacher training programs for bilingual extension and for ESL certification. So some of that additional support so that folks can go through that process more readily. Miss, I don't know if you want to build on some of that or if there's anything else that.
That's good. I would say that DML continues to partner with the Office of Teacher Recruitment, and we are always looking at where the needs are and trying to foresee before the vacancies come up to ensure that we know how to get more teachers. And I appreciate Chair Joseph, you mentioning about you getting that extension, because that's the message that we want to send to teachers. We have a number of teachers who speak the language and could get the added certification at no cost or little cost, and that's part of the process that we have, that we want to ensure that we communicate. I did that with my teachers, got them duly licensed, and it was great to have that process. So that's what we're doing, and we continue to look at partnering with higher ed to ensure that we get more teachers recruited and we keep them.
Yep. The other part of that is that the more teachers that we have trained for those extensions, even if they don't move into a position where they are teaching an ENL or bilingual class, they now have the strategies and they have the know-how so that they can support all learners better. And there are other programs that are already in existence too that I also wanted to mention that are about credentialing for bilingual, essentially the scholarships and loan forgiveness programs, including the Jose P. full scholarship and loan forgiveness for positions like bilingual speech, because those are ones that are working directly with our students with disabilities. And then the bilingual pupil services program. So the paraprofessionals who want to move into teaching can get that. It's an extension program essentially too.
Wonderful, thank you.
Any connections you have, by all means, please.
Definitely, I love bilingual pupil services for the work that they do. Thank you so much. How can the council support you, and how can we help with funding and making sure that we support our ENLs? I'm not here just for the fight, but I want to make sure, how can we partner to make it stronger and better for our children of New York City?
Yep, thank you. And I think actually we heard it a great deal in this hearing today, right? Each and every time that someone said, I would like to talk to you more about, I'm walking away with a page full of ideas and people I need to follow up with, ranging from LGBTQ supports for students in different languages, to thinking about culture, to making sure quality control and impact, right? And even potentially a Bangla bilingual program in Jackson Heights, right? So we want to make sure that we're following up with folks. And And I think part of that is obviously the council's interests and areas of expertise. But the other part is something that I'd mentioned earlier. You necessarily represent the community. And so what are you hearing? What can we learn from you that folks need and want, so that we know what to tackle and what to pay attention to? And we're always, making sure that we're being responsive to the larger community that we serve. And so I think that that's one way that we absolutely would benefit from working with the council. Any feedback that you have, as much as sometimes it's painful to hear, it's really important for us to be aware of where we may be falling short, because either we weren't paying attention to that specific lens or point of view, or it's something that we just need to have an outsider point out for us so that we can get better at what we do. I mean, ultimately what we want to do is better meet the needs of our students, and so we need to hear that feedback. And then just make sure that we're maintaining an open door. You and I have had an opportunity already to share even a car ride. And so I think that opportunity to have conversations with the different members of the council and to maintain an open door, you have our contact information and we want to make sure that you're using it, and vice versa. So I think it's, I don't know if you want to add anything else.
Yeah, I like Deputy Chancellor Quintana, I have annotated many ideas and questions. How do we know that students are learning? The auditing, the monitoring schools, the ELL visits, ensuring that we're doing more for parents. And I also would like to hear where is it working well? So we can go and visit and learn from those places where it's working well. And because, the best learning happens in schools. So how do we, you're hearing from your districts, how can we improve where we're not measuring, but at the same time, where are the places that we can learn from? Thank you very much. And I really appreciate having you focusing, Chair, on this population. It's really warm for me. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Best practices for one of my favorite schools in Brooklyn is PS 189, one of the best bilingual programs in the city. It's a model with these best practices. If you're looking for a model, PS 189.
All right.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you,
for
Chair.
the thoughtful questions. Yeah.
And that concludes questions and answers for the administration. So we want to thank the department for being here today for the first hearing of this new chair in this new session. So ladies and gentlemen, next we are going to turn to public testimony. And I just want to, sorry, screen froze. I just want to remind everyone that we will be doing 3 minutes for each person for public panels. I'll be calling people in panels of 4. Council members, if you have questions for any particular panelist, please use the raise hand function in Zoom, and we will call on you at the conclusion of the panel. The first panel that we'll be calling has 2 students on it. Sufan Wan, CACF Asian American Student Advocacy Project, and Oscar Wang, CACF Asian American Student Advocacy Project, and Kanveri Sengupta, CACF. The panel following will be Estrella Juarez, who is also a student, and providing translation for Estrella will be Araceles Lucero, followed by Francois Nizzi, the New York Math Academy and Coaching Services, Rita Rodriguez-Enberg, Advocates for Children, and Andrea Ortiz, the New York Immigration Coalition. But we will first turn to Sufan.
Time starts now.
Good afternoon. First, I want to thank Chair Joseph and the Council for allowing this conversation. My name is Sufan Wan, a junior at Francis Lewis High School in Queens. I'm an advocate for language access at the Asian American Student Advocacy Project. Our language access team aims to ensure that all students participating in NYC English learning programs are able to set themselves up for success in their academic futures. We hope to inspire a set of changes and to identify the flaws and needs of the current ELL curriculum. This month marks my 4th year arriving in the US. My English level was an elementary 2nd grade English speaker at the very beginning when I came here. Thus, my parents and I had language barriers and cultural struggles oftentimes. The COVID pandemic interrupted education system so unexpectedly, also created a huge academic gap for ELL students. Only speaking my native language at home meant that most of the time that spent speaking English was only at school. No doubt, years of remote learning were devastating for us. Without consistent opportunities to listen, speak, write, and read in English, caused ELL students to feel lost and helpless as we try to reach our fullest potential. I didn't even know if my pronunciations were correct when I learned new words. In addition, distant learning limit adequate translation support to ELL families. For example, there was a rare chance to have a translation into parent-teacher conference. Families either rely on students to translate for them or are not able to communicate with teachers. The pandemic also extended 1 year of stay in the ESL program for those people who were already capable to pass it, because we were not able to take the NYSA in 2021. Every September, EL students concerning about their futures when they still didn't pass the NYSA. There needs to be alternative ways to measure our success rather than using the standardized test. The extension of staying in the ESL program significantly matters to us. It prevents ESL students from taking advanced classes such as AP and honor, which exceedingly affects our academic performance and college readiness. The COVID pandemic intensified the deficiencies in EL education. I am aware of this. Everyone should also be aware of EL education. Schools should constantly provide bilingual staff to deliver family support and stay communicate with ESL students and their guardians to better understand their needs. ELs are now a great portion of the total citywide enrolled students. I am not an individual. We, the entire ELs, should be heard and seen. Together, we work for students' better academic futures. I urge you to support EL education in our community. Thank you.
Thank you. And next we will hear from Oscar Wang, CACF Asian American Student Advocacy Project.
Time starts now.
Hi, everyone. My name is Oscar. I'm currently a Stuyvesant High School senior. I want to thank Councilwoman Joseph and everyone here today for today's conversations. As for me, I finished my ESL education when I was in 1st grade at PS 89 in Elmhurst. But after that, I continued to struggle speaking outside the classroom and expressing myself in public until the 7th grade. For the years that I spent distancing myself from my parents and my culture, I think those are largely the reasons why I couldn't give this testimony to my own mother in Chinese, even if I wanted to. I think to me, my ENL education focused too much on the results of building fluency in English and not enough on building the cultural literacy and the feeling that I really belong here. I think it's the precedent set by this results-oriented system today that concerns me about the futures of our next generation of MLLs. For the past 2 years, I've been working alongside my team in the Asian American Student Advocacy Project under CACF on the same campaign as Sufan mentioned. And during April of last year, we reached out to several ESL teachers from FDR High School, Emma Lazarus High School, and other schools with prominent ELL AAPI student populations. And here's what we gathered from the surveys and interviews that we conducted. The teachers that we contacted discussed their general thoughts on how remote learning was going for them and their students. While the issues noted in the briefing covered a lot of what we gathered, many of the teachers elaborated on ways that things could have gone better for them. While some teachers felt more organized and at ease due to the nature of remote learning, others felt like they were holding up a wall and doing nothing, and they paid out of pocket for certain learning softwares. However, they all agreed on one thing, which is that standardized testing wasn't really helping anyone. They argued that while the expectations on the NYSA created good guidelines for teaching, the fact that teachers didn't receive results until August left little room to plan for their curriculum and completely address their students' weaknesses. In addition, our teachers also agreed that the cutoffs for proficiency levels were too drastic. That placed some students at a level where they were either overprepared or underprepared for their new environments. I think the inefficiencies created by standardized testing and also the loss in engagement created by the pandemic makes a situation where students are only trained to answer these sort of academic questions rather than express themselves and articulate their own identities and interests. In other words, I feel like as we implement changes to help students recover from the gaps created by remote learning, I feel like it is crucial that we discuss these opportunities that allow students to really flourish as individuals who aren't afraid of their identities, who aren't afraid of speaking their voice, right? And I think it's all because at the end of the day, the last thing I want to see is another generation of students who, like myself years ago, remove themselves from their native culture and do so to fit into the cultural norm. I really commemorate the focus on bilingual education today, and I want to thank you for your time.
Thank you. And finally, we'll hear from Kaveri Sengupta, Coalition for Asian American Children and Families.
Time starts now.
Good afternoon. My name is Kaveri Sengupta. I'm the Education Policy Coordinator at the Coalition for Asian American Children and Families, or CACF. Thank you so much to Chair Joseph and members of the Committee on Education for giving us this opportunity to testify. CACF is the nation's only Pan-Asian Children and Families advocacy organization, and several of our member organizations work with ELs from diverse AAPI backgrounds, and you also just heard from our wonderful current and former EL youth leaders. As a result of the model minority myth, challenges facing AAPI ELs are often overlooked in public discourse, although over 42,700 AAPI students are ELs, making up nearly 1/4 of ELs system-wide. Last year, of the top 10 languages spoken at home by ELs, 6 were languages spoken in Asia. Today, CACF asked the City Council to hold our public education system accountable to these communities' needs. Throughout the pandemic, our member organizations have reported that COVID-19 has had a particularly detrimental impact on AAPI ELs and their families. These families typically live in multi-generational homes and lack equitable access to healthcare, and students need holistic support. We call on DOE to be intentional around hiring social workers, school counselors, and other mental health professionals who are bilingual in AAPI languages, can provide services in language, and center culturally humble and responsive practices using guidelines to assess these pieces in hiring. They must also ensure that AAPI ELs have access to affirming, culturally responsive, sustaining education, including the Universal Mosaic curriculum. There's also a lack of transparency around languages spoken by bilingual school staff, which results in difficulty for advocates and other stakeholders to identify gaps in services beyond anecdotal evidence. Thus, we urge DOE to provide these data disaggregated by ethnicity and languages spoken. To provide an example illustrating need that is not unique, a CBO in our membership serves a public school in Chinatown with over 70% of limited English proficient Chinese immigrant families, which is about 280 families. Only one staff member at the school, the parent coordinator, knows Chinese, which is nowhere near enough to cover the need. An EL's grandmother informed the CBO that he was pushed many times by other students and got hurt. He was sent to the school nurse during the day, but because none of his teachers or staff can communicate with him in his language, he doesn't know who he can approach for help. In addition, the COVID-19 pandemic has led to a rise in anti-Asian sentiment and violence, and the impact has been felt by ELs and their families. To address this, we call on DOE to invest in more sustainable school and CBO partnerships in school districts with AAPI, immigrant, and EL populations that are often left out to provide wraparound services. Another after-school EL student and our member CBO witnessed an anti-Asian attack against her mother and was traumatized. The student's mother has not been willing to discuss it, even though the student really does want to and needs to talk about it. She's expressed worry and fear about not feeling safe in her neighborhood, and her school is ill-equipped to support due to a lack of bilingual staff. We also really prioritize better data collection and data disaggregation. The DOE does not collect data on AAPI ethnic groups, which disregards the differences associated with Asian ethnicities and impedes the ability to provide targeted services. Home language data should be coupled with ethnicity data for a more complete picture of students' experiences and challenges, and we're advocating for City Council to allocate to DOE $500,000 for the proper implementation of data disaggregation. We also urge the DOE to release a comprehensive EL demographic report for the past year, as well as the diversity report for last year, which is aligned with Local Law 59, and should provide analysis on the impacts of changes in admissions processes with regard to EL enrollment. Finally, we advocate for the baselining of $6 million for language access funding to DOE to expand on that work that's already being done that we heard about earlier today. We have been working with DOE over months to ensure that our AAPI students and families feel the impact of these funds. We look forward to co-creating a public school system that puts the needs of its students that it has historically marginalized first in all decisions, defining their well-being and success as the measure of its strength. Thank you.
Thank you. And that concludes the testimony for this panel. Chair, did you have any questions or comments for this panel?
Well, good afternoon. Thank you for your voice in that space. It's very important. And of course, we always stand with the Asian community as you go through this. And as a partner in, as the chair, you will be hearing more with us. So we'll be more engaged. No, I didn't have any questions.
All right, thank you. That concludes the testimony for this panel. I'm going to now call the next panel, but just so folks can queue up, the panel following will be Natasha Capers, New York City Coalition for Educational Justice, Tazin Azad, Colin Buckingham, and Victoria Munoz. But we're now going to go to panel 2. So we're going to hear from another student, Estrella Juarez, but providing translation for her testimony will be Areceles Lucero. And I do apologize for messing up names. People mess up my last name all the time. I'm doing my best. Ms. Lucero, do you want Estrella to go first and then you'll? Okay,
yes.
So we'll go ahead and unmute her.
Yes. Estrella, ¿estás ahí?
Sí. Me llamo Estrella, tengo 18 años de edad y me gustaría compartir mi experiencia como inmigrante y estudiante. Llegué aquí hace 2 años y se me dificultó mucho seguir estudiando porque llegué aquí cuando yo estaba en segundo de preparatoria en México. Entonces estuve como 2 o 3 meses sin estudiar porque en ninguna escuela me querían aceptar y me decían que yo no tenía espacio, y a veces me decían simplemente que no, sin ninguna explicación. Después de visitar 3 o 4 escuelas, finalmente encontré una escuela bilingüe que me aceptó y allí fue donde culminé mi 12 grado. Aunque recibí mucho apoyo de pocos profesores, pero creo que no es suficiente apoyo para los estudiantes como yo. Es necesario tener apoyo emocional o consejería. No es fácil migrar a otro país y reencontrarme con mi familia que no había visto por más de 15 años. Tampoco es fácil migrar sin saber el idioma y sin imaginarme los obstáculos que tendría que pasar para poder seguir estudiando y para poder ver a mi familia. Para entrar a la universidad me ha sido muy difícil porque he estado en los Estados Unidos, no he estado en los Estados Unidos el suficiente tiempo para aprender el idioma. Fue cuando me reuní por primera vez para registrarme con los consejeros en Bronx Community College después de ser aceptada a la universidad, pero me dijeron que no podría ingresar porque mi nivel de inglés no era suficientemente bueno y me refirieron al programa de CLIP. El propósito de este programa es mejorar el nivel de inglés y prepararse para poder estar académicamente preparada para ingresar al college. Pero CLIP a mí me dijo que no podría estar porque mi nivel de inglés era muy bajo. Yo me he sentido muy triste y a veces bajo de ánimo, perdiendo las esperanzas de que si podré seguir estudiando o no. Una profesora de BCC me dio una lista de programas a los que podría ir para aprender inglés. Y después de 4 meses de estudiar inglés por mi propia cuenta, finalmente, este 31 de enero del 2022, pude pasar el examen de CLIP. Ingresé al programa. Estoy aquí compartiendo mi historia el día de hoy porque quiero pedirle a la ciudad de Nueva York, al Departamento de Educación que apoye a los estudiantes como yo para que tengan las mismas oportunidades para seguir estudiando y para que no se sientan tristes y solos. Muchas gracias.
My name is Estrella. I am 18 years old, and I would like to share my experience as an immigrant and as a student. I came to this country 2 years ago, and I found it very difficult to continue with my studies when I first arrived as an 11th grader. When I first arrived, I was about 2 to 3 months without studying because no school wanted to accept me, and they would tell me that they did not have any more space, or sometimes they would give me no explanation to why they couldn't take me. After visiting 3 or 4 schools, I finally found a bilingual school that accepted me. There where I was able to complete the 12th grade. Although I did receive a lot of support from a few teachers, I believe there isn't enough support for students like me. Social emotional support and counseling is needed. It isn't easy to migrate to another country and to reunify with my family that I had not seen for more than 15 years. It isn't easy to migrate without knowing the language, and I didn't imagine all the obstacles I would have to face to continue with my studies and to be able to be with my family. It has been very difficult to enroll in college because I have not been in the United States a sufficient amount of time to learn the language. It wasn't until I met with counselors at Bronx Community College to complete my registration after being accepted that I was told I couldn't enroll because I did not have the sufficient level of English to enroll, and I was told about CLIP. The purpose of this program is to improve my English language skills and to prepare me academically to enter college. But CLIP also told me that I couldn't enroll in the program because my English skills were low. I have felt very sad and sometimes not as motivated, losing hope around whether I would be able to continue going to school or not. A professor at BCC gave me a list of programs where I could learn English on my own. And finally, this 31st of January, I was able to pass the CLIP exam and have enrolled in the program. I am here sharing my story today because I would like to ask the City of New York and the Department of Education to support students like me so that they can have an equal opportunity to continue with their studies and so that they don't feel sad and lonely. Thank you very much. And I was also supposed to testify.
Okay, you can now go. We'll reset the clock and you can now go ahead and testify.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Thank you for having me. I'm the executive director of MASA. We're a community-based organization that works with Mexican and Latin American immigrant children, youth, and families in the South Bronx. We have a community-led integrated model that engages the entire family, and we are grounded in a deep commitment to strengthening literacy, leadership, and power for Mexican, Central American, and Indigenous people. The community that MASA services is often considered hard to reach, largely undocumented. 95% of our adults are foreign born, 40% of our parents have less than a primary school education, and 85% have less than a secondary school education. About 30% of our community members speak an Indigenous language, and the majority, 83%, have less than an annual income of $30,000. This is pre-pandemic data, and so we can only imagine what those numbers may be now. As such, MASA families often face complex and overlapping barriers to accessing resources and services, all of which impact their health, education, income, and overall well-being. They are navigating a complex web of systems and institutions in an unfamiliar language, and often with limited literacy skills in their primary language and very limited, sometimes non-existing digital literacy skills. This makes it very difficult to apply for 3K and pre-K, and quite frankly, at all age groups, when they have to do the application online. As of this moment, MASA has been a part of the Linking Immigrant Families to Early Childhood Education program that is better known as LIFE for 4 years. This project has supported hundreds of MASA's recently arrived immigrant families to apply and enroll in 3K and pre-K, where we have also been able to provide additional support through one-to-one intensive case management and referrals. It is critically important that we do not approach our English language learners and their families with a one-size-fits-all solution, and provide more funding to support the most marginalized communities, including Indigenous-speaking communities, with the resources that they need to ensure their children enter ready to learn at school and to enter 3K and pre-K programs. I am here today to advocate for $4 million in additional support from the City Council to expand the LIFE project across all 5 boroughs and to fund a diverse set of CBOs to do this work. In addition, another community that is often left behind is our newcomer ELs, who many times do not find the adequate schools and programs to properly support them in fulfilling their dreams to graduate from high school and to continue their education. I would like to share with you a story about a father from Honduras whose adolescent son migrated to New York after he lost his mother to cancer. All he wanted was a seat for his son, but could not find him a placement. The father had to work around the clock, making it more difficult for him to support his son in enrolling. Eventually, he was sent to MASA, and we were able to connect him directly to the enrollment office for a placement. The student also received referrals to mental health support services that were properly equipped to handle the multiple stressors of migrating to this country as an adolescent, including processing the migration journey, which can be a violent one, and working through the family reunification process for those whose parents' relatives are not familiar to them. As you heard from Estrella, she's from Guerrero, also a Mixteco speaker, and I'm here for her and the thousands of older newcomer ELs, advocating for the City Council to fund $2.1 million in initial investment for a transfer school pilot program to increase access for newly arrived and older immigrant youth. Thank you.
Thank you. And next we will hear from Francois Vizzi, New York Math Academy and Coaching Services.
Time starts now.
Thank you. Thank you, Honorable Chair Joseph, for caring about the impact of COVID-19 on immigrant families and EL academic achievement. My name is Francois Nzi. I'm a founder, executive director, New York Math Academy and Coaching Services, also known as NYMAX. NYMAX is a Harlem-based academic support program offering tutoring and individual services to immigrant youth and families in Central Harlem and South Bronx. I'm here to represent New York Immigration Coalition Education Collaborative to request 2.1 million initial investment for a pilot program to increase access to quality school options for newly arrived high school age immigrants. For over a decade, New York Math Academy has helped hundreds of older immigrants from African French-speaking countries enroll in schools that meet their academic and social needs. We seek to find schools that can fuel student academic success, which even before the pandemic was extremely difficult for older students, especially those who are 16 years and older. Unfortunately, every year we are confronted with the same challenges to find older youth quality public education. Right before the pandemic, a parent reached out to our organization to help him find a school for a 17-year-old who just arrived to the state from Senegal. Because we were not able to find him the adequate school, the young man enrolled and matriculated in a nearby charter school. That school, regrettably, was not equipped to give the student the support and programming that he really needed. 3 months later, he was already considering dropping out of school because of frustration. Then in March 2020 came to COVID-19, which deeply would deepen the desperation. And it's very tragic that due to the pandemic and being in a program that was not simply the fit for him, he ended up dropping out. Nevertheless, this young man is very resilient. Today, at 19 years old, he is finally back in high school, this time to an L transfer school. But one of the things that is very sad is that the school is very far from where he lives. And now he has even less time and more pressure for him to graduate. This is why I'm here to ask for the $2.1 million pilot program to increase the access of older students like my students. If this young man had had more opportunity available to him, this situation would be much different from now. And if L transfer school were available in all places where immigrant kids live, all older adolescents students would have had options and ready to meet their needs. Thank you.
Thank you. And next we'll hear from Rita Rodriguez-Enberg, Advocates for Children.
Time starts now.
Hi, good afternoon. Congrats, Chair Joseph, my namesake, and all the Education Committee members. My name is Rita Rodriguez-Enberg, and I am the director of the Immigrant Students' Rights Project at Advocates for Children of New York. I am a proud former L and immigrant. Prior to the pandemic, the needs of Ls and immigrant families went largely unmet. Ls have consistently performed well below standards in reading and math, with only 9% of Ls proficient in reading and 19% of Ls proficient in math in 2019. Ls have a right to receive English as a new language instruction to help them develop their English language skills, but many Ls did not receive this instruction during the pandemic. Although over 40% of our parents speak a language other than English at home, and some have low or no literacy in their language, the DOE relied almost exclusively on web and email communications during the pandemic. This reliance on digital communication and delays in providing translated information resulted in families being left in the dark and unable to participate in their children's education. In 2021, AFC saw an increase in the number of newly arrived older immigrant youth seeking to enroll in New York City schools. And we had a very hard time enrolling them, surprisingly, because we're education lawyers. Unfortunately, there are few DOE schools able to provide the support these students need. The DOE's L transfer schools provide this supportive learning environment, but there are only 5 such schools, 4 of which are in Manhattan. I'm here today to urge the City Council to fund 3 proposals to help our Ls and immigrant families. First, to address the L achievement gap, we urge the city to invest $12 million for 120 schools with underperforming Ls to hire an L instructional specialist. Ls require targeted language and academic instruction to meet their unique needs, but too often we encounter long-term Ls who have not received enough support and cannot read or write despite being in high school. We see this every day, I guarantee you. The L instructional specialist, a pedagogue who reports to the school principal, would be responsible for ensuring that all Ls, including those with disabilities, at their school are receiving grade level instruction in core subjects, developing age-appropriate literacy, receiving additional academic support where needed, are on track to pass to the next grade, and their parents are being engaged. Second, we urge the city to allocate $2.1 million to launch programs to support Ls ages 16 to 21 at existing non-L transfer schools in Queens, Brooklyn, and the Bronx. This funding would enable 4 schools in the first year to hire ENL teachers, bilingual social workers, offer wraparound supports, and provide PD so that all educators are prepared to support their newcomer immigrant youth. Finally, to ensure immigrant parents receive school-related information and can play a meaningful role in their children's education, the DOE needs to strengthen its efforts to communicate with immigrant families, taking into account families' varying levels of literacy and access to digital media. The city invested $4 million this school year, thanks to the City Council, but this funding will expire in June 22 and will be limited in reach. The city should invest and baseline $6 million for the next year to establish a permanent central system for immigrant family communications. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. And the final panelist for this panel will be Angie Ortiz, the New York Immigration Coalition.
Time starts now.
Thank you. I'm Andrea Ortiz from the New York Immigration Coalition. This year, New York City must address a long-standing injustice that was deeply exacerbated during the pandemic. Quality school programs are inaccessible for thousands of immigrant youth and families. During the pandemic, many immigrant students were feeling especially lost and isolated. And sadly, far too many immigrants weren't even able to enroll, let alone find quality programs. The city must address this through 2 proven initiatives. First, we request a $2.1 million initial investment for a transfer school pilot program to increase access for newly arrived high school age immigrants. A 2022 Migration Policy Institute analysis found that nearly 4,000 newcomer immigrant students who were 14 to 21-year-old were not enrolled in school that did not have a high school diploma. Nearly 90% of these youth are 16 to 21, which is the toughest age range to find adequate placement. Our proposal will create quality programs for them and address the fact that immigrant youth are dropping out now at a rate almost 5 times that of their native English-speaking peers. Older newcomer immigrant youth ages 16 to 21 who enroll in high school have little time to learn English and fulfill graduation requirements before they age out. Transfer schools are essential because they specialize in supporting youth at risk of dropping out and helping older, undercredited students succeed. But unfortunately, while there are transfer schools in every borough, 4 out of the 5 L transfer schools are in Manhattan. Therefore, the pilot will target our outer boroughs where most immigrant youth live and struggle to find programs that meet their needs. And by developing best practices and identifying solutions that can be replicated to address common challenges, the pilot would test out a model that schools can follow to serve newcomer immigrant youth. Second, the city should invest $4 million to expand our LIFE project. The majority of the 156,000 parents of 0 to 4-year-olds who are limited English proficient in New York City also lack access to a computer or internet and need robust community-based engagement and supports to learn about and enroll in 3K and pre-K programs. Our LIFE project, through our CBO partners like MASA, LSA Family Services, and Fifth Avenue Committee, has successfully helped over 400 immigrant families enroll in pre-K and 3K by providing outreach, counseling, and referral services to eligible families. Our success is demonstrated by the fact that despite a drop in the city's enrollment during the pandemic, LIFE project partners saw no drop in enrollment within the families we assisted. So we are here asking for $4 million for 20 CBOs across the 5 boroughs to provide culturally responsive and linguistically diverse outreach, application and enrollment support, referral services, and early intervention to support immigrant families of 3 and 4-year-olds. Finally, New York City must reject across-the-board cuts and hiring freezes and instead employ the unprecedented funding streams from state and federal stimulus to invest in programs that replicate success and finally increase access for immigrants. Thank you very much for this opportunity to testify, and congratulations, Chair Joseph and the rest of this committee for this important hearing and paying attention to these issues. Thank you.
Thank you to this panel. We're now going to go to our next panel. Natasha Capers, New York City Coalition for Educational Justice, Tazan Azad, Colin Buckingham, and Victoria Munoz. The panel after that will be Chauncey T. Young, New Settlement Parent Action Committee, Herman Younger, Parent Action Committee, Lois Lee, Chinese American Planning Council, and Somia El Romim, the Women's Empowerment Coalition of New York City. But we'll first turn to Natasha Capers from the New York City Coalition for Educational Justice.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. I am Natasha Capers, Director of the New York City Coalition for Educational Justice. We are a parent-led, organizing, multilingual group who unapologetically organize in Black, Brown, immigrant, and Indigenous communities. We are here in solidarity with multilingual learners and their families. CEJ supports all recommendations made by our sibling advocacy groups, the New York City Immigration Coalition, MASA, and Advocates for Children. One of our biggest barriers to a high-quality education for ELS students is monolingual English speakers' lack of basic respect for non-fluent English-speaking parents, families, and students because of xenophobia, systemic racism, and white supremacy. We must ensure that culturally responsive pedagogy, teaching training, and curriculum is a standard in New York City schools, including all forms of language access for students and families. The K-12 ELA and Math Mosaic curriculum, all programming, policies, and parent engagement efforts must be free of all forms of language bias and xenophobia. Sadly, there's a long history of New York City schools and all other governmental departments leaving multilingual learners behind along with their families. We have witnessed a lack of translation and interpretation services in all forms of meetings, leading to a deliberate disenfranchisement of parents and families in the education of students, including this meeting, as the invitation was in English only, and the part where you had to request interpretation was also in English. CEJ has had a campaign fighting for culturally responsive and sustaining education for 5 years and has heard countless stories of parents who have been told that they are a hindrance to their child's education because they do not speak English. Often in spaces where multilingual learners are the central topic, there are typically no proper translation or interpretation services offered, and I have witnessed in meetings with the Department of Education, there often a refusal for them to wear or use interpretation equipment so that they can hear simultaneous interpretation and be in clear and direct communication with non-fluent English-speaking families. We know it is possible to give good interpretation services, as CEJ has done so for 16 years in person and virtually over the pandemic, including having 4 separate languages, English, Spanish, Bangla, and French, and ASL interpretations during virtual town halls and a Miro forum without any issue. There must be an investment in ELS students and a systemic shift in how ELS students and families are engaged to put an end to the continuous disrespect and isolation they face. Thank you.
Thank you. And next we're going to turn to Tazan Azad.
Time starts.
Thank you. My name is Tazeen Azad, and I am an elected parent leader from District 22 and parent empowerment advocate centering language access and language justice. We could tell that a crisis, integrity of a system could be measured by during a crisis by its approach to its most vulnerable folks. The pandemic has highlighted the multilingual communities and their needs have been an afterthought on receiving consequential attention from their DOE policies. Although there has been some improvement on the consideration to improve the processes of language access, we are nowhere close to language justice. DOE is still woefully lacking in identifying the nuanced needs of the language learner communities and creating sustaining structural support for them. We saw educators and multilingual students suffer because of the lack of support for both of them among remote learning and as well as in person in refusal to develop pedagogy during a pandemic. There is a lack of certified ENL teachers and second language teachers who were reduced to being push-in educators as opposed to providing immersed experiences for our students. So we are doubtful that our MLL students have received adequate access to education. DOE, in response to the opportunity loss and lack of access, proposed beyond access and proposed supplementary support systems for our students in after schools or weekend classes. However, even those were interrupted and disrupted with erratic and chaotic implementation of COVID guidances and policies, and the refusal to provide remote options for those who needed it the most. Multilingual families with IEPs have been especially vulnerable during this time as they relied on as they were systematically disenfranchised when they initiate, monitor, or advocate for their students. As we are fearful, we are fearful that the pandemic has caused a lack of support for engagement to many families in initiating IEP processes. So we've encouraged the council to look into whether or not that is the case. Multilingual parents' engagement and empowerment has been a special issue and an enduring issue. COVID has been extremely difficult, although timely notifications are much better now. Safety guidances have been largely been delayed, and in the translations happen to be mostly jargony and unreliable as far as being digested by folks. We also saw major lacks as far as COVID literacy in testing access and guidances to multilingual families, those who were most vulnerable during these periods. I also want to touch a little bit on dual language programs that often end up being tracked programs and contribute to segregation. And so we propose and we ask that the DOE and the chair and the committee really pays attention whether or not this happens as we look into new options. And also I want to talk a little bit about the language access the DOE has been providing in all platforms for parent engagement, where language learners are segregated to phone lines, in dark phone lines, so to speak, where we don't see any of our parents speaking in person, which happens to disenfranchise them furthermore. This is a platform, or this is the mechanism that we should revisit in order to make sure that we include our multilingual families and give them the respect that Natasha was speaking for. Thank you so much.
Time has expired.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. And next we'll turn to either Colin or Colin Buckingham. Sorry if I messed that up.
Time starts now.
Hi, my name is Colin Buckingham. I'm active in community organizing and that kind of thing. First, I want to note that a lot of the questions and testimonies here have been about specific requirements that need to be addressed, and many of the answers given by the Department of Education to the council question specifically seem to amount to mission statements or abstract goals rather than concrete steps that have been taken. But my testimony is regarding the budget cuts proposed by Mayor Adams, who also last year was quoted to suggest that one teacher could remotely teach more than 200 students at one time. The proposed budget cuts to education, specifically to schools with decreased enrollment, which, as Chair Joseph said, has been felt by schools with L severely, and will, as most budget cuts have historically done, harm immigrants, L, and marginalized and historically denied students the most. So I want to urge the City Council and Department of Education to fight for funding for L and echo Andrea Ortiz's concerns.
Thank you. And next, we will turn to our final panelist for this panel, Victoria Munoz.
Time starts now.
Hello, everyone. I'm the parent of a student in Queens District 28. I understand that the present business concerns much needed equity for language learners in DOE, but a matter of some urgency brings me here today. As you know, the mayor is likely to remove the indoor mask mandate for DOE schools starting next Monday, March 7th. The proposed measure would also apply to children under age 5 who currently are not eligible for the vaccine. I find this deeply alarming. For parents like me whose pre-K child cannot receive the vaccine, the world has not returned to normal. I live with elderly and immunocompromised parents. The dangers of my daughter bringing COVID home extend beyond my personal fears for her welfare alone. In this multi-generational immigrant household, we live in the same fearful uncertainty about COVID that many others have abandoned in the collective momentum toward a speedy return to normal. I know that parents whose children are themselves immunocompromised also feel this frustration most heartily. We feel abandoned and overlooked. The resounding neglect of our concerns and current shifting public health policies is beyond enraging. It is a stark inequity that requires an adequate redress. Although my child will continue to wear a mask, masking only works effectively where it is universal. We can turn to southern and Midwestern states where there was not universal masking and consequently infection rates skyrocket for reliable evidence of this maxim. Some years ago, when expressing her dissent in Shelby County versus Holder, the late Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg stated that ending the practice of pre-clearance of the Voting Rights Act was like, quote, throwing away your umbrella in a rainstorm because you are not getting wet, end quote. Removing the mask mandate at this juncture presents a similar conundrum and logical fallacy. Those who are not currently as vulnerable to COVID should not be so swift to throw out the umbrella because they themselves are not getting wet. We must protect the unprotected. I urge you to do everything in your power to advocate for unvaccinated children under age 5 and to maintain the indoor mask mandate in DOE schools until all children can be protected. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. And that concludes the testimony for this panel. We are now going to turn to our next panel, but so folks can queue up. Following the folks I'm going to call, we'll hear from Joseph Ko, Korean American Family Service Center, Salma Mohammed, the Arab American Family Support Center, Tara Foster, Legal Services NYC, and Meredith Jones, City's First Readers. But we'll first turn to Chauncey Young from the New Settlement Parent Action Committee.
Time starts now.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Chair Joseph and members of the New York City Council Committee on Education. The Parent Action Committee would like to thank you, Councilmember Rita Joseph, for your leadership and concern for English language learners and the impacts of COVID-19 on immigrant families and English language academic achievement. The Parent Action Committee is a multicultural group of concerned parents and community members dedicated to improving the quality of education for all children in New York City with an emphasis on the Bronx, and we are based in Community School District 9. We also empower and educate parents on their rights in the New York City public school system. We organize parents and community members. We conduct research and outreach, develop leaders, network with allies, and offer training opportunities and workshops for parents and lead public actions to reach our goals. We hold school officials, elected officials, and government agencies accountable for the quality of education our children receive, and we collaborate with citywide coalitions in order to make real lasting change in our public school system. The Parent Action Committee was formed by parent leaders in an after-school program in New Settlement over 25 years ago due to concerns about the quality of education in our neighborhood schools. The Bronx in our neighborhood has always been a community of immigrants, and over 2/3 of the residents in Bronx Community Board 4 speak a first language other than English. PAC is a parent-led organization, and the fight for language justice, equity, and access for all students and family has been core to the mission of the Parent Action Committee for decades. Even prior to COVID-19, multi-language learners, English language students struggled in District 9 and throughout the Bronx, and honestly, many schools struggled to support families that were not native English or Spanish speakers. Over the past decades, the number of students and families whose native language is French, Bangla, Arabic, Fulani, Soninke, or one of the many African or indigenous languages has continued to grow throughout the borough. What we would like to note in COVID-19 is that so many of our families and our students did not receive devices on time, did not receive communications from the school because the school was unable to communicate with parents in their native language or with students. We assume that language access is the only issue, but we have cultural differences, and we also had a lack of access to technology. It's wonderful that the DOE was writing emails and trying to call parents, but many of those schools did not have updated blue cards and no way to really communicate with families. So as has been mentioned before, many of our English language learners, students, and families became very disconnected and had a huge language loss. We also noted situations where communities from, in many cases, our West African families did not receive devices in a timely manner. And some families waited almost an entire semester before they received devices so that their students were able to learn. These are all concerning issues and issues that I think the department really needs to work with as moving forward. We need to have more staff that are able to communicate with students and families in their native language. It's one thing to have a language line, but many schools and school staff do not know how to utilize this service effectively, and frequently just ignore families that do not speak languages that the school can easily address.
Time has
We're also
expired.
here to support the First Step campaign from our New York Coalition for NYIC Education Collaborative, and ask that they support families moving into high school, $2.1 million for the first year, and to support a 3-year, $8.3 million transfer school pilot program. Thank you.
Thank you. And next we will turn to Herman Younger, Parent Action Committee.
Time starts now.
My name is Herman Younger, and I am here today representing the Parent Action Committee. I myself am also an immigrant from Honduras and a former EL student, and so this issue is very near and dear to me. During the COVID pandemic, we have learned that several areas have severely impacted English language learners: learning, technology and instruction, health, access to public assistance, and resources and mental health. The COVID pandemic brought to light significant learning challenges for families of ELLs that may result in academic and achievement gaps. Some of those challenges include a lack of access to digital services and internet connectivity, families' limited capacity to support online learning, school and family language barriers, and inadequate online learning resources and training for teachers. As an immensely diverse group of students, English learners will have widely varying experiences during the COVID-19 pandemic, and as such, a broad range of educational and schooling needs, not to mention physical and mental health related needs. For example, Asian American EL students may face bullying and discrimination due to xenophobic responses to COVID-19, while rural and migrant ELs may not have access to cell phone reception, let alone Wi-Fi hotspots and computers for distance learning. The Parent Action Committee has supported immigrants for 25 years in our pursuit toward education justice in New York City. And as such, we are recommending that districts should ensure that all EL students have a Wi-Fi connected device, provided freely and without penalty should a device be damaged. Distance learning should, like in-person education, provide accessible content and English language development instructions to ELs, and can benefit from the potential affordances technology offers for supporting multilingual learners. Until access is universal, districts and schools should avoid penalizing students for their inability to access or complete distance learning activities, and technology-free learning opportunities should be provided. Examples include books, activity packets, and educational games. Many students have disappeared since schools closed. Among these are EL students. Districts and schools should draw on existing resources to improve contact and communication with families of EL students. For example, family liaisons, community partners, school district translators, active parents, and bilingual and English language development teachers, all of whom can serve as bridges to EL students and their families. Schools should, in addition, send communication in all major languages spoken by the ELs via platforms that are accessible to parents. EL students, like their peers, will have missed out on a great deal of instruction, but will likely have had extended time with immediate family. They may have deepened their knowledge of their home language, learn more about cooking and gardening, or taking care of family members. Leveraging this knowledge is central to culturally relevant and responsive teaching and content, which entails schools and teachers drawing on students' knowledge and skills and engaging community and family members in ways that bring culturally rich knowledge in schools into instruction and content. We also want to lift up the First Step campaign proposal from our partners at the New York Immigration Coalition, asking for $2.1 million in the first year and a commitment to support a 3-year, $8.3 million transfer school pilot to increase newly arrived high school aged immigrants' access to programs that meet their needs. Thank you.
Time.
Thank you. And next we will turn to Lois Lee from the Chinese American Planning Council.
Time starts now.
Hi, can you hear me? Okay,
Yes.
so I just have to answer the door. Well, my name is Lois Lee. So Chinese American Planning Council has early childhood competent speaking programs in 3 boroughs. As an early childhood director, I have to talk about all different levels from early childhood all the way up to high school. Our elders are feeling discouraged, disconnected, and lost. We need the city to invest more than just language support, but to help them transition into education systems and society by supporting culturally competent curriculums and encompassing social emotional learning. I have to bring up some points. Number one, the ELs, we have seen that the ELs and after-school programs are unable to complete the homework assignments, saying, I don't know what the teachers are saying in morning school. I cannot do the homework. So our after-school teachers must reteach all the concepts that they're supposed to have learned. So we want City Council to help fund the YCD Compass programs to close the ELs learning gaps. Two, the parents are complaining about the dual language programs. They say that the homework assignments are too difficult even for parents. There is no curriculum. The curriculum is made up in every district. So we need to have a set curriculum. The parents want to be a part of the conversation that develops curriculum. The curriculum should be teaching basic Chinese skills. Now their children are not only behind in English, they're also behind in Chinese. The dual language programs are not working. Number three, high school juniors and seniors in schools like Flushing International High School and Queens International High School of Health and Sciences and YABC transfer schools, they all have collaborations with CPC. We are looking forward to having a robust SYEP program this summer, employing thousands of high school youth in our programs. However, if you are in a public school building like the Compass programs or an early childhood center, you have to be PETS, which is the fingerprinting. And that costs $135 to fingerprint each youth. So for the Flushing International High School and all these international high schools, they said that in order to have their students graduate from their schools, they must have this academic service learning, community service. And so one principal says, okay, I'll pay for my interns if you would just be our work site. So I took theirs. But another high school principal said, we cannot afford it, it's not in our budget. Please take my student. The student is willing to pay that $135. And then I said, in my budget, I don't have all this $135 for every intern who needs to graduate at a work site. So I'm asking the city to waiver the $135 because if they can waiver it in the summer for the SYEPs in the Compass programs, why can't they waiver it in early childhood centers? I wish that the Deputy Chancellor of Early Childhood was at this meeting because it would have been very helpful to help fight our cause, because I have so many students who ran away from home, who committed suicide. We are the programs that really help. The nurturing early childhood centers have been a life, we have really helped out these teenagers because we are nurturing, we are kind, they have a sense of belonging. Please fund our programs by taking away the $135 waiver. I think my time is up. Is that what you're going to tell me to do?
Time. Thank you.
I know, because I'm looking at the clock and I was trying to hurry up and say everything that I wanted to say, but there is a lot to say. And I really want a pathway for, for success for the transfer schools, where I was going to talk about that, the Lower East Side Prep that we have, and to fund that $21 million. And also for certification, what is the pathway for our paras, teacher assistants? They are bilingual and they need to become teachers. I would like to know about that because I know there's a big shortage. And so thank you very much.
Thank you. And I do want to remind everyone that testimony, submitted written testimony may be as long as you wish, and it is read by committee staff and is part of the record. So folks can email that to testimony@council.nyc.gov. We accept it for up to 72 hours after the close of this hearing. The final person on this panel that we'll hear from is Somia El-Romeen, the Women's Empowerment Coalition of New York City.
Time starts now.
Hey everyone, my name is Sumaya Rumaim. I'm with the Women's Empowerment Coalition of New York City. Our organization is based on South Brooklyn. I'm trying to actually open the video. Yeah. I'm here today to raise my voice and make sure that you're gonna hear what's happening in our community in South Brooklyn. Our organization mission, it's like building power and unity among women through education and leadership. But because of the pandemic, when the pandemic hit in 2019, we had to jump out of our mission and to start like providing direct services and hotline to help and support the community's member in South Brooklyn, especially like we see that a lot of community members, they do not speak English very well, and they need help with translation and understanding what's going on around them. And so many of the phone calls that we received was like, concern from the parents about like, remotely learning and how they can help and support their kids with the remotely learning. And if there is any supporting group for parents to educate them about how to use the technology or Google Classroom, and also like, understand what's happening in their own language. We have so many clients who speaks Arabic, and we were like, trying to communicate with the schools to understand like, how we can support those parents. And I have witnessed that a lot of kids, especially the ages between 15 and 17, were feeling isolated, especially the new immigrant who came to this country, and they don't know, like, they entered the school at the year that the pandemic hit, and they felt they don't understand what's going on around them, and they didn't receive the support that they need to receive it and deserve it. And I have actually a client who's her daughter 17 years old who had to drop off school and to help her mom and start working, because like, and when I tried to help her out and like trying to support her, she said like many people, they advised me to go and apply for GED. It's more easy for me, especially I'm a new immigrant and I'm gonna take time to learn English. And that was like really a red flag for me. That's like, a lot of people, is not only this girl, like a lot of kids, they are going through a lot in school, especially the kids who, like the young people who come to this country and enter school in level 11 or 12th grades. It's like, they didn't feel that they are welcoming and supported in school. And I hope that you, I'm here today like to ask you to make sure to fund this program, which is requesting $2.1 million national investment for a transfer school pilot program to increase access for newly arrived high school age immigrants. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And that concludes the testimony for this panel. The next two panels that we'll hear from, first we'll hear from Joseph Ko, Korean American Family Service Center, Salma Mohammed, Arab American Family Support Center, Tara Foster, Legal Services NYC, and Meredith Jones, City's First Readers. Following that panel, we'll hear from Zulma Vizcarrondo, Fifth Avenue Committee, Ray Lopez, LSA Family Services, Alejandra Vasquez-Barr, Next 100, Deborah Mulrain, Reads Initiative, and Albania Jimenez Literacy Incorporated. But we'll first turn to Joseph Ko from the Korean American Family Service Center.
Time starts now.
I would like to thank the City Council and the Committee on Education for the opportunity to testify. My name is Joseph Ko, and I am the Youth Program Counselor of the Korean American Family Service Center. We provide social services to the immigrant survivors and their children who are affected by gender-based violence. All our programs and services are offered in a culturally and linguistically appropriate setting. KFST's Hodori After School program serves Asian American students from kindergarten through 8th grade who are from families at or below the federal poverty level with immigrant parents or caregivers. Our Hodori After School program targets students who are under the care of single parents who constantly struggle financially and are challenged by cultural and language barriers. We also target children who are victims of domestic violence and sexual assault, as well as children who are indirectly affected from being exposed in their own households. Our program supplements and supports the myriad of challenges faced by our APA students, many who are immigrants themselves and our ELL students. At the beginning of every school year, we conduct an assessment and find that close to 100% of them never finish their homework on time. They struggle to meet metrics and their report cards show difficulties in their classes. Challenges due to limited English proficiencies exacerbate already existing issues due to family violence at home, poverty, and cultural differences. Teachers and administrators at school often lack cultural competencies necessary to properly engage these APA students and often make assessments or decisions based on standards that do not take into account the cultural nuances that are extremely relevant in developing the correct academic plan for these children. The model minority myth is in direct contradiction to the fact that many APA students from immigrant families display serious emotional, social, and behavioral difficulties. Our APA children require additional support from school counselors to mitigate and work to reduce stressors in the school environment that hinder not only their academic performance, but also their social emotional development, increase their self-esteem, and develop healthy communication skills. Our counselors and teachers at KFSC work with families in our Hodori After School program to specifically address the gaps in the education systems that overlook our APA immigrant student population and the failings of school educators and administrators to fund and resource proper protocols for families to address their child's unique needs and challenges. Particularly the COVID-19 pandemic and subsequent closings of schools and businesses highlighted these gaps even further. When schools closed in March of 2020, then remote learning, our after-school teachers spent extra hours to bridge the digital gap and navigation of the school system. Many of our families have multiple children, majority do not then, and still do not have the adequate number of digital devices for virtual school. Not only were our families hindered by lack of digital devices and access to the internet, they are facing new web-based platforms like Google Classrooms or Zoom, which require many additional hours of tech support and training. Particularly for the immigrant children and children of immigrant parents, between remote learning and recent in-person learning have been a huge burden as our parents and caregivers have been struggling financially. Our Hodori After School program continues to operate via online classes. However, we still have students that can't participate today because they don't have the proper support at home to help with remote learning, lack a digital device, or are unable to access the internet. Thank you. Thank you again for the opportunity to testify on this important issue today.
Thank you. And next we'll turn to Salma Mohammed from the Arab American Family Support Center.
Time starts.
It looks like, all right, there we go. Now you're unmuted.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Chair Joseph, City Council members, and community members. My name is Salma Mohammed, and I'm the Partnership and Capacity Building Specialist at the Arab American Family Support Center. At the Arab American Family Support Center, we provide a range of free social services citywide in every single district, such as adult education classes, translation services, academic enrichment for youth, mental health services, domestic violence case management support, cash assistance, access to health insurance, food security services, and much more. We welcome all those who are in need, but with 27 years of experience, we have developed a research-driven, community-focused, trauma-informed, culturally responsive, and linguistically competent approach to serving New York's growing Arab, Middle Eastern, Muslim, and South Asian, or MEMSA communities. Communities that have been historically underrepresented and underserved. Our staff is representative of our client base. We speak 36 languages, enabling us to serve people that mainstream providers are largely unable to effectively reach. Seeing the increase in need in 2021, AAFSC scaled our efforts to provide wraparound support serving 10,000 people. While we are tremendously inspired by our community's resiliency through COVID-19, we are conscious of the ongoing challenges they face. We completed a COVID-19 impact survey with over 300 households in our network and found that 55% of families experience barriers in their remote learning and experience numerous socioeconomic and mental health stressors, all of which hamper learning. Research shows a direct relationship between literacy levels and positive social and economic indicators, as well as the importance of immigrants in the New York City economy. Immigrants comprise of 37.2% of the city's population, but 44.2% of the labor force. Today, in New York City, 1 out of 3 adults, 2.2 million people lack English language proficiency, a high school diploma, or both. This enormous gap reflects decades of insufficient investment and an underlying lack of understanding and support for immigrant education and its crucial role in our society. To address COVID-19's impact on English language learners, AAFSC requests that the city ensures that all legislation addresses the unique and multi-layered challenges MEMSA English language learners face and prioritizes CBOs that provide culturally and linguistically competent services for funding for citywide initiatives. Thank you.
Thank you. And next we'll turn to Tara Foster, Legal Services NYC.
Time starts.
Good afternoon. Thank you so much for hosting this oversight hearing on COVID impact on English language learners. I am Tara Foster from Legal Services NYC. I work in the Education Rights Project. Legal Services provides free civil legal services to low-income New Yorkers. We're dedicated to fighting poverty and seeking racial, social, and economic justice for the families we serve. We have a holistic practice and practice in many different areas, and there's more in my comments that you can all read about. There's no question that there were many disparate negative impacts of COVID-19 for English language learners and limited English proficient families. The COVID-19 pandemic has laid bare the racial and socioeconomic inequities that exist in our society, including issues in our city's education system. Many low-income immigrant families suffered high rates of food insecurity, job loss, sickness, and death due to COVID. L and LEP students, many of whom are people of color, have also had to grapple with highly publicized instances of systemic racism and violence. Some of our clients who had already experienced violence and trauma in New York or in their native countries experienced heightened anxiety, stress, and even additional trauma and isolation. Tragically, these vulnerable families frequently were shut out of important educational supports and services for their children at high rates due to the systemic technological divide and language access and communication failures. Legal Services NYC's education advocates have taken on a number of individual cases as well as group litigation to combat inequities exacerbated by the COVID-19 pandemic. We've also, in 2021, founded the Healing Center Schools Task Force, which is a coalition of educators, parents, advocates, mental health providers, and others dedicated to healing-centered schools that are culturally sensitive and trauma-informed. Students in vulnerable populations who did not have access to remote learning devices or reliable internet, and families with low technological expertise were especially adversely affected. And in our experience at Legal Services, low-income English language learners and limited English proficient students suffered higher rates of learning loss due to this digital divide. Statistically, these immigrant families were less likely to have access to computers and high-speed internet and had overall lower digital skills and training than their English fluent counterparts. Moreover, students from households where English was not the primary language experienced additional learning loss and academic setbacks due to the New York City Department of Education's inadequate interpretation and translation services for limited English proficient parents. L and LEP families with whom we work frequently complain that they never or rarely received communication or correspondence in their preferred language, and they rarely received interpretation and translation services from their children's schools.
Time.
Okay, well, just wrapping up then, I think we at Legal Services feel it's so important, and the council can really help out by encouraging the Department of Education to address and eliminate the digital divide so that all low-income families, including low-income L and LEP students, have access to free computers and free high-speed internet to ensure equitable access to learning, and also that they look into ways to help compensate for the learning loss, including academic intervention services, tutoring, and other support, and that they develop effective systems to ensure that all families, particularly L and LEP families, receive pertinent information about remote learning and other educational access in their preferred language. Thank you so much. And by the way, I wanted to say that I loved hearing from all of the students, and there were so many things people said that were so important in this hearing today. Thank you so much for hosting this hearing.
Thank you, Tara. And next we will turn to Meredith Jones from City's First Readers.
Time starts now.
Hi, thank you for the opportunity to testify on behalf of the New York City Council's only early literacy initiative, City's First Readers. My name is Meredith Jones, and I'm the City's First Readers manager at Literacy Inc., which is the managing organization for City's First Readers. To address the impact of COVID on English language learners, we need to start with our youngest learners. Long-term investment in immigrant families with children 5 and under is a preventative approach that can mitigate the negative impact of the pandemic. City's First Readers is one of the best and most effective ways to accomplish this critical task. There are over 500,000 children under the age of 5 in New York City. 44.5% of them live in low-income households, and it is estimated that an additional 325,000 children have been pushed into COVID-related poverty. The burden of poverty is greatest for immigrant children whose families were not always eligible for safety net programs or who face challenges receiving these funds. Additionally, a disproportionate number of immigrants are employed in essential roles. As a result, a disproportionate number of immigrant parents faced high levels of stressors, including exposure to COVID, which resulted in the deaths of many parents and caregivers. It is clear to those of us who work with young children every day, they are not immune to the stress and trauma of the pandemic. City's First Readers delivers proven strategies that directly addresses the early learning opportunity gaps that English language learners face and that protect them from the effects of trauma. This initiative delivers free, high-quality, culturally relevant, and research-backed early literacy programming that positions children for academic success and can result in positive long-term outcomes, helping to break cycles of poverty. This programming provides the tools for parents to create safe, stable, and nurturing relationships that interrupt the experience of trauma and help children thrive. The Council recognized the power of early literacy when it began City's First Readers in 2015. Today, City's First Readers, or as we call it, CFR, is an impactful cross-sector coalition of 17 partners. We engage approximately 1 million families annually in all 51 council districts to ensure that New York City children have a solid foundation to start school successfully, thrive academically, and succeed beyond their school years. We urge you to recognize the importance of a preventative approach for our youngest learners. Thank you again for the opportunity to testify today.
Thank you, Meredith. And that concludes testimony for this panel. Next, we're going to hear from Zulma Vizcarrondo from the Fifth Avenue Committee.
Time starts now.
Good afternoon. My name is actually Kim Sykes from the New York Immigration Coalition. Zulma had an emergency, but very much wanted her testimony to be heard and asked me to read it. So I will do that. Good afternoon. My name is Zulma Vizcarrondo, ESL coordinator at Fifth Avenue Committee in Brooklyn, New York. Thank you for the opportunity to testify. This is our 4th year working on the LIFE project, helping families with the enrollment process for pre-K and 3K. I work with my colleague Anna Rong Wu, who provides Chinese translation. We share out information on pre-K and 3K very broadly in our community. We make presentations at the end of Sunday Mass. We use WeChat. We go to all the places in our community that families normally go to. Fifth Avenue Committee has assisted over 100 families with enrolling their children in pre-K and 3K programs, and we have served over 500 families with workshops on the enrollment process, deadlines, and appeals. We're serving families that often do not have access to the internet or a device, so we meet with them and work with them individually. We discuss their options and complete the application together, and we continue to support our families after placements are announced. We also advise families about services for children with special needs. The families we work with say that having someone guide them through the whole process makes an enormous difference. Many families would not be able to participate in pre-K or 3K without this type of individual support from someone they feel comfortable with. And we need to be able to continue providing this incredibly valuable service to our community. In order to continue the LIFE project and expand it to other communities, we are asking for $4 million to fund 20 CBOs across the 5 boroughs. Thank you very much again.
Thank you. Next, we are going to turn to Ray Lopez from LSA Family Services.
Time starts now.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to participate in this very important hearing. LSA Family Health Service is a community-based organization that's been in the East Harlem community for almost 65 years. We're one of the CBO partners on the LIFE project led by New York Immigration Coalition, and we've been part of the project since the beginning. Our work focuses on the zip codes 10026, 27, 29, and 35, which cover much of the neighborhoods of East, Central, and West Harlem. During the pre-pandemic days of the LIFE project, we realized that many of our families needed significant support setting up and maintaining email accounts to complete and manage online applications for 3K, pre-K, and other early education opportunities for their young children. When the pandemic started, families started to share their struggles to have their school-age children connect to their schools from home. This is due to issues with computer hardware and issues with connectivity. And our staff quickly pivoted to try and provide support to maintain these vital connections between families and schools. Many families also felt uncertain about enrolling their children in school, especially since they're not eligible for vaccination, did not know about each school's COVID precautions. So our LIFE project team at LSA Family Health Service worked with families individually and in groups on Zoom to provide this information and support them through all of the uncertainty. As a result, many of our families felt comfortable enrolling their children, and some now feel more confident about communicating with the schools. Now, I've only shared a sliver of the impact that COVID-19 has had on an already fragile situation for families in our community who were already living in overcrowded situations, paycheck to paycheck, and with some families, some adults in the families without health insurance. The LIFE Project team and the rest of our LSA program staff mobilized to connect people to services and reliable information with the resources available to us. We think that a significant investment into a citywide LIFE project would enable many CBOs like LSA Family Health Service to conduct a massive outreach effort to inform immigrant families of their eligibility for pre-K and 3K programs, meeting families where they are. We can work effectively in conjunction with the DOE to provide one-on-one intensive support to LEP parents, taking them through the entire process from learning about school options to enrolling in their program of choice. We can also support parents with early interventions for students with disabilities, provide extensive referral services, and we can confirm that when given the information and opportunities that families need, they are excited to take advantage of quality early childhood education. Thank you.
Thank you. And next, we're going to turn to Alejandra Vasquez Bauer from Next 100.
Time starts now.
Hello, good afternoon, and thank you, Chair Joseph and members of the New York City Council Committee on Education. My name is Alejandra. I am a policy entrepreneur at Next 100, a community engagement coordinator at IMSchools, and a member of the Language Access Working Group. As a former L and teacher of high school aged new arrivals in Miami, I'm grateful to the Committee on Education for your commitment to Ls, prompting this important hearing. Data demonstrate that COVID has had a devastating impact on New York City's Ls students, exacerbating long-standing educational inequities. Last January, Advocates for Children released an analysis that demonstrated high rates of absenteeism among Ls. For example, 10th and 12th grade Ls missed about 1 in 4 school days. According to NYSED, L graduation rates rose in the last year to 60%, as we discussed, but we worry this could be due to graduation exemptions granted under the pandemic, and even still, is significantly lower than graduation rates for their native English-speaking peers. Furthermore, the dropout rate for ELLs is more than 5 times that of their peers. Additionally, the Migration Policy Institute estimates that thousands of newly arrived immigrant teens in the Bronx and outer boroughs were not enrolled in school in 2019, based on their analysis of Census Bureau data. All of these issues are compounded by the systemic language access failures that prevented many immigrant families from receiving up-to-date information, understanding their choices, and making informed decisions about their children's education and safety. Alongside our partners at the New York Immigration Coalition's Education Collaborative, Next 100 offers 3 recommendations. 1, please fund the First Step Campaign pilot program, a $2.1 million initial investment to support a transfer school pilot that will increase access for newcomer high school aged immigrants to programs that meet their needs and are accessible in their own communities. Second, baseline a $6 million investment in language access for all, which will allow the DOE and the Language Access Working Group to continue to develop linguistically responsive communications infrastructure with and for immigrant communities. Finally, we urge the City Council to provide funding for the collection and reporting of data on immigrant children to more meaningfully increase equitable access to the academic, social, and emotional supports they need, and which may not be fully captured by ELL status data collection, since nearly 54% of New York City ELLs in 2019 were born outside the United States. Without programs that specifically target the unique needs of immigrant students, they will continue to be left behind. Without adequate and linguistically appropriate communications made in partnership with CBOs and parent leaders that inform our communities about those programs and services, immigrant students will continue to be left behind. And without the appropriate data to identify the inequities and opportunity that immigrant students face, immigrant students will continue to be left behind. An investment in the First Step campaign pilot, the continuation of language access for all, and the collection and reporting of immigrant student data will help to ensure that New York City schools move forward with multilingual communities as we continue to recover from this pandemic. Thank you.
Thank you. And next, we're going to turn to Deborah Mulrain from Reed's Initiative.
Time starts now.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for having me. My name is Deborah Mulrain, and I'm the Chief Organizational and Community Advisor for Literacy, Inc., also known as LINC. LINC is a facilitating partner for New York City Reads. New York City Reads is an evidence-based model that mobilizes the resources of 11 partner organizations to support families and school holistically, addressing literacy needs of children from birth through 5th grade in East New York, East Harlem, and South Jamaica. Thank you for the opportunity to submit this testimony on behalf of the many immigrant families and English language learners who participate in programs delivered by New York City Reads. We have individually and collectively witnessed the disproportionate impact of COVID on ELLs. It is important to acknowledge the diversity of ELLs experiences and recognize that even before the pandemic, our ELL population was already facing educational, economic, and health disparities. As the state and the city plan to address the broad range of needs of our ELLs, there is a unique opportunity to innovate, to develop an approach that is comprehensive and coordinates cross-sector partnerships so the solutions truly address the diversity of needs from multiple perspectives and the weight doesn't fall on one single institution or stakeholder. Rebuilding to create equity and resilience in New York City will require accelerating the funding of community-based approaches and relying heavily on partnerships and coordinated cross-sector efforts. Community-based models and coalitions like New York City Reads can provide social capital that connects immigrants to each other and to additional services across the community, often in sustainable ways that empower parents and local leaders to play an active role in helping to provide solutions. Together, New York City Reads partner organizations provide ELLs with increased access and opportunities that strengthen school-home community bonds throughout the year. Family and parent engagement, books, culturally responsive educational resources, enrichment activities, culturally responsive curriculum, native language and linguistic support for children and families. Let's start with dedicating the summer of 2022 to making reading a beloved activity by teens and tweens and all the way down to tots and toddlers. L students were already at heightened risk for summer slide. Let's create the programming that will return summer slide to where it belongs, on the playground. Now is the time for the City Council to assert and affirm a commitment to New York City Ls by investing in a widespread literacy programming that will ensure they emerge from COVID with the skills they need and the interest to enjoy reading. We have the resources in every community, but we need council leadership to mobilize them in pursuit of a unified goal of literacy. After all, Literacy Inc. is an inoculation against poverty. Literacy is an inoculation against poverty. Thank you.
Thank you. And next we'll hear from Albania Jimenez from Literacy Inc.
Time starts now.
Hello and good afternoon. As you said, my name is Albania Jimenez, and on behalf of Literacy Inc., or LINC as we are known, thank you for the opportunity to present our concerns about the importance of COVID on English language learners. LINC's reading testimony is full of citations and facts. I hope that you create the chance to read it. And in my brief time to date, I want to leave you with two thoughts. And the first is about the importance and impact of early, frequent, supportive literacy programming for ELs. And the second is about the value of early literacy as a pandemic response for ELs and all emerging readers. And the first strategy comes straight from a Chicago politician's playbook on voting, early and often. So looking at the third grade 2019 ELA test scores analyzed by EL students, there is a big surprise in the category of former EL students. These are children who, by the time that they reached third grade, had already completed the full array of EL programming offered by the DOE. Care to guess what these former EL students score? 73% reach proficient levels, 73%. This speaks to the effectiveness of reaching children early and often. Those who need additional support to become proficient readers can succeed if they receive the support. COVID has only made the need for early and often more acute. So the second thought I share includes but moves beyond EL students, and that is the value of daily reading as an equity builder and as a pandemic response. Early literacy is about far more than a skills acquisition. By starting early with picture books and practicing a habit of daily reading, families can make reading together an oasis of calm despite other circumstances, whether directly caused by COVID or a cascade of associated stressors. So, and I want to end saying that that daily cuddle time can anchor conversations and provide deep comfort. Unlike many families of young children in immigrant communities, not yet in school and isolated at home throughout the pandemic, LINC families had resources at home to continue providing stimulation to their children. And we know that access to literacy resources is an important factor in a child's school success. Access that is weakest for children living in poverty. And I want to end by saying This impact should make community-based early literacy an important and essential part of our city's pandemic response. At the same time, it creates a base to rebuild as a more equitable city, one where all students can thrive. Thank you for the opportunity to present today.
Thank you. And that concludes our final panel. If anyone had just come and go from the Zoom and we may not have called your name and you haven't had a chance to testify, if you can use the raise hand function now on Zoom, we will call on you. Not seeing any hands. Chair, that concludes the public portion of our first hearing for this session.
Thank you. Thank you so much. All right. So we're going to conclude. I want to thank everyone, administration, committee staff, advocates, council members, CBOs, and parents who participated in the hearing. So many have testified and asked a lot of questions. So we will continue to be the voice and advocate, and we'll follow up with DOE on all the questions and the data that were not available. Malcolm and team, thank you so much. All the CBOs, all the partners, my colleagues, thank you. And we will do this again.
I just need you to say this hearing is now adjourned.
Oh, now this hearing is adjourned.
All right. Thank you, Chair.